People treat you based on what they can get from you. This truth is uncomfortable because it exposes the hidden transactions beneath most human relationships. Beneath kindness, loyalty, and affection, value often dictates behavior. People may genuinely enjoy your presence, but how they treat you is deeply influenced by what you provide. Attention, validation, solutions, emotional support, resources, or access. What you give becomes the silent currency that shapes their respect and interest. When you are useful, you are noticed. When you are available, you are appreciated. When you are accommodating, you are welcomed. But the moment your availability decreases or your usefulness fades, the energy shifts. This change is rarely announced. It appears as distance, indifference, or subtle disappointment. Most people don't consciously decide to treat you differently. They simply respond to the loss of benefit. This is why boundaries often trigger resistance. Saying no interrupts an unspoken agreement. The people who benefited most from your openness are usually the first to react, not because you did something wrong, but because the dynamic changed. What once flowed freely now requires effort, and effort exposes intention. The most dangerous illusion is confusing being needed with being valued. Being needed creates dependency, not loyalty. True regard survives inconvenience. Conditional regard disappears when the exchange stops. Many people only reveal how they truly see you when you can no longer provide what they relied on. Once you understand this truth, you stop giving blindly. You begin to observe patterns, not promises. You learn to recognize who values your presence and who only values your contribution. And that awareness quietly changes everything. Loyalty often ends when convenience does. This truth cuts deep because it challenges the comforting belief that loyalty is rooted in principle rather than ease. Many people claim loyalty proudly, but what they often mean is consistency, as long as it doesn't cost them anything. When staying loyal is easy, comfortable, or beneficial, it feels natural. The moment it requires sacrifice, discomfort, or risk, loyalty is quietly renegotiated. Convenience acts as the invisible glue in many relationships. As long as you are nearby, useful, aligned, or effortless to maintain, people stay. When circumstances change, distance, conflict, growth, or hardship, what was once called loyalty begins to erode, not through dramatic betrayal, but through absence, excuses, and silence. People don't always turn against you. They simply stop showing up. This is why loyalty is rarely tested during good times. It is exposed in moments of inconvenience, when defending you risks reputation, when supporting you costs energy, or when staying connected requires effort. Many people choose the path of least resistance, not because they lack morals, but because comfort feels safer than commitment. The most painful part is realizing that shared history doesn't guarantee loyalty. Time spent together creates familiarity, not obligation. When loyalty demands inconvenience, some people detach without explanation, convincing themselves they had no choice. Understanding this truth sharpens your perception. It teaches you to watch who remains when it's hard, not who stays when it's easy. It shifts your definition of loyalty from words and gestures to presence under pressure. And once you see how quickly convenience dictates allegiance, you begin to value rare, proven loyalty differently. Kindness is frequently mistaken for weakness. This truth exists because many people confuse gentleness with a lack of boundaries and compassion with compliance. When you are kind, patient, and understanding, others often assume you will tolerate more than you should. Your empathy is misread as permission. Your silence is interpreted as acceptance. Over time, kindness becomes something to test rather than something to respect. Human behavior is shaped by patterns. When someone realizes that you respond to disrespect with understanding instead of consequences, they learn how far they can push. Not everyone intends to exploit kindness, but many will subconsciously adjust their behavior once they sense there is little resistance. What begins as warmth slowly invites entitlement. This is why kind people are often taken for granted. Their efforts blend into the background, unnoticed until they stop. Their forgiveness becomes expected, their availability assumed. In contrast, assertiveness is often respected immediately, even when it lacks warmth. Strength commands attention. Kindness must be protected to survive. The danger is not kindness itself, but kindness without limits. When compassion is not balanced with self-respect, it attracts people who benefit from imbalance. Some individuals mistake your willingness to understand as an unwillingness to stand firm. Understanding this truth changes how you express kindness. It teaches you that warmth and strength are not opposites, that you can be generous without being accessible to harm, that true kindness includes discernment, and sometimes the kindest act is refusing to be mistreated. Most apologies are about easing guilt, not fixing harm. This truth becomes clear when you pay attention to what happens after the apology is spoken. Many apologies are delivered not as an act of responsibility, but as a release valve for discomfort. The words are offered to quiet tension, to restore normalcy, to make the apologizer feel better, not to repair what was broken. The pain caused is acknowledged just enough to move past it, not enough to change behavior. Guilt is an uncomfortable emotion, and people instinctively seek relief from it. Saying, "I'm sorry," can be a shortcut to emotional comfort, a way to appear accountable without actually facing consequences. This is why apologies often come with explanations, justifications, or subtle deflections. The focus quietly shifts from the impact of the harm to the intention behind it. Real repair requires effort, patience, and humility. It involves listening without defensiveness, accepting that forgiveness may not be immediate, and changing patterns that cause the damage. Many people are unwilling to do this work. They want closure, not accountability. They want absolution, not transformation. This is why repeated apologies without change feel empty. The words lose meaning when the behavior stays the same. Over time, the injured party learns that the apology was never about them. It was about restoring the comfort of the person who caused the harm. Understanding this truth teaches you to look beyond words. You begin to notice whether an apology is followed by changed behavior or simply by relief. And once you see the difference, you stop being moved by phrases and start paying attention to actions that actually heal. People listen to reply, not to understand. This truth reveals itself in the small pauses where you realize you were never truly heard. In many conversations, listening is not an act of curiosity, but a waiting period. While you speak, the other person is preparing their response, shaping their opinion, or rehearsing how to redirect the conversation back to themselves. Your words become background noise to their internal dialogue. Understanding requires presence, and presence requires effort. To truly listen, someone must temporarily set aside their ego, their assumptions, and their need to be right. Most people find this uncomfortable. It is easier to respond than to absorb, easier to argue than to reflect. So conversations become exchanges of monologues rather than moments of connection. This is why misunderstandings persist even after long discussions. People hear fragments that confirm what they already believe and ignore the rest. They respond to tone instead of meaning, to perceived intention instead of actual words. Listening becomes selective, shaped by emotion rather than clarity. The emotional cost of this truth is heavy. It leaves people feeling unseen, dismissed, or misunderstood, even in close relationships. You can explain yourself repeatedly and still feel unheard because understanding was never the goal. The goal was response, defense, or validation. Once you recognize this pattern, you begin to value rare listeners differently. You notice who asks questions instead of interrupting, who pauses before responding, who reflects instead of reacting. And in seeing how uncommon true understanding is, you become more intentional with your own listening, aware of how easily words can be heard without ever being felt. Respect is rarer than love. This truth is difficult to accept because love is often romanticized as the highest form of connection, when in reality, respect is what sustains and protects it. Many people are capable of love in some form, affection, attachment, desire, familiarity, but far fewer are capable of consistent respect. Love can exist alongside selfishness, control, and disregard. Respect cannot. People can love you and still talk over you, dismiss your boundaries, undermine your choices, or take your presence for granted. Love is emotional. It can be impulsive, conditional, and self-serving. Respect, on the other hand, requires restraint. It demands that someone honors your autonomy, your limits, your time, and your dignity, even when it doesn't benefit them. This is why relationships often fail despite love being present. Without respect, love turns unstable. It becomes possessive instead of protective, intense instead of safe. When respect is missing, affection loses its grounding and slowly erodes into resentment or imbalance. Respect reveals itself in small, quiet ways. It shows in how someone speaks about you when you're not present, how they respond when you disagree, and whether they accept your boundaries without punishment. These moments are less dramatic than declarations of love, but far more telling. Understanding this truth reshapes how you evaluate relationships. It teaches you that being loved is not enough if you are not valued as an equal, that passion without respect is fragile, and that the rarest, most meaningful connections are not built on how strongly someone feels, but on how carefully they treat you. Familiarity breeds dismissal, not appreciation. This truth reveals how quickly presence can lose its value when it becomes predictable. When someone is consistently available, reliable, and close, their efforts slowly fade into the background. What was once noticed becomes expected. What was once appreciated becomes assumed. Familiarity dulls perception, causing people to stop seeing the effort behind consistency. Human attention is drawn to contrast and scarcity. When something is always there, the brain stops registering it as valuable. This is why strangers are often treated with more courtesy than those closest to us, and why new voices are heard more clearly than familiar ones. Familiarity creates comfort, but comfort often breeds carelessness. Over time, people begin to overlook what you contribute because it no longer feels optional. Your presence is treated as a constant rather than a choice. Your patience becomes invisible. Your support is noticed only in its absence. This dismissal is rarely intentional, but it is deeply damaging. It erodes connection while maintaining proximity. This is also why effort is often recognized only after distance appears. When availability is reduced, appreciation suddenly returns, not because your value changed, but because the familiarity that masked it was interrupted. Absence restores contrast. Understanding this truth forces you to reevaluate how freely you give access to yourself. It teaches you that consistency should be intentional, not automatic, that appreciation is not guaranteed by closeness, and that sometimes being less available is the only way to be fully seen. Many people only miss you when you're unavailable. This truth surfaces the moment your presence is no longer guaranteed. While you are accessible, responsive, and consistent, your value often fades into the background. Familiarity dulls appreciation. Your availability becomes an assumption rather than a gift. People grow comfortable knowing you are there, and comfort slowly replaces awareness. Absence disrupts this comfort. When you pull back, become busy, or remove access, the space you once filled becomes noticeable. The silence feels unfamiliar. What was taken for granted suddenly feels missing. This is when messages appear, concern resurfaces, and nostalgia is mistaken for care. But missing someone is not always about valuing them. Sometimes it is about reacting to loss of convenience. Many people don't miss you as a person. They miss the role you played, the support you offered, the attention you gave, the stability you provided. Your unavailability forces them to confront the effort you once absorbed for them. The discomfort they feel is often about adjustment, not affection. This is why some people only reach out when you stop showing up, not because they suddenly realized your worth, but because the ease you provided is gone. Your absence breaks the illusion that you were always going to be there. Understanding this truth changes how you interpret longing. It teaches you to question whether someone misses your presence or simply the access they lost. And once you see the difference, you stop mistaking delayed interest for genuine attachment. Support disappears when your problems last too long. This truth is painful because it reveals the limits of most people's empathy. In the beginning, support flows easily. When a struggle is new, visible, or temporary, people show concern, offer help, and check in often. Your pain feels understandable, even meaningful. But as time passes and the problem doesn't resolve, the energy around you begins to shift. Long-term struggles make people uncomfortable. They disrupt the expectation of progress and recovery. When your pain lingers, it no longer feels inspiring or solvable, and patience quietly thins. Support turns into distance, encouragement turns into silence, and understanding gives way to subtle judgment. People begin to wonder why you haven't moved on yet. This happens because sustained support requires emotional endurance, and many people don't have it. They want resolution, not repetition. They want to feel helpful, not helpless. When your struggle challenges their belief that effort leads to quick healing, they retreat to protect their own comfort. The most isolating part is that nothing about your pain changed, only their tolerance did. You are left feeling like a burden for needing time, as if healing should follow a schedule that makes others comfortable. Understanding this truth changes how you interpret absence. It reminds you that disappearing support often reflects someone's limits, not your worth. It teaches you to value the few who stay when it's no longer easy, no longer uplifting, and no longer brief. Those who remain when your struggle lasts are rare, and their presence carries weight. People remember how you made them feel, not what you did for them. This truth explains why effort alone is rarely enough to secure lasting connection. Actions matter, but emotions leave the deeper imprint. You can show up endlessly, solve problems, sacrifice time, and offer support, yet still be remembered poorly if the emotional experience felt heavy, uncomfortable, or unacknowledged. Feelings become the filter through which all memories are stored. The human brain prioritizes emotional impact over factual detail. It doesn't catalog sacrifices, it records sensations, how safe someone felt around you, how seen or ignored they felt, how small or empowered they felt in your presence. Over time, these emotional impressions replace the specifics of what you actually did. This is why people can forget years of loyalty but vividly recall a single moment of embarrassment or disappointment. Negative emotions imprint more strongly than positive ones. A harsh tone, a moment of dismissal, or an unmet expectation can outweigh countless kind actions in memory. This doesn't mean effort is meaningless, but it does mean that emotional awareness is crucial. People often assume that good intentions and hard work will speak for themselves. They don't. If your actions are not paired with emotional sensitivity, they may be misremembered or overlooked entirely. Understanding this truth changes how you interact. It teaches you to pay attention to emotional residue, not just outcomes. To consider not only what you do, but how it lands. Because long after the details fade, the feeling you left behind becomes the story people carry about you. Envy hides behind compliments. This truth is unsettling because it reveals how admiration and resentment can exist in the same breath. Compliments are not always expressions of support. Sometimes they are carefully disguised observations rooted in comparison. When someone praises you while subtly minimizing, qualifying, or overstating your success, the words may sound kind, but the emotion beneath them is conflicted. Envy thrives quietly. It rarely announces itself as hostility. Instead, it disguises itself as curiosity, humor, or praise. A compliment followed by a pause, a forced smile, or an unnecessary remark can reveal more than the words themselves. The person is acknowledging your progress while internally measuring it against their own perceived lack. This is why envy often appears in those closest to you. Strangers compare less. Proximity intensifies comparison. When your growth disrupts someone's self-image, they may struggle to process it honestly. Complimenting you becomes a way to appear supportive while still protecting their ego. The danger of hidden envy is that it feels safe. You lower your guard because the words are positive, but over time, the energy feels off. Encouragement lacks warmth. Praise feels hollow. Support is absent when it truly matters. Understanding this truth sharpens your emotional awareness. It teaches you to listen to tone, not just language, to notice consistency between words and actions. And once you recognize how envy masks itself, you become more selective about whose praise you trust and whose distance you quietly accept. Some people want you well, but not better than them. This truth is unsettling because it exposes envy where encouragement appears to exist. Many people genuinely care about your well-being, but only within a range that doesn't threaten their own sense of worth. They want you stable, comfortable, and safe, but not surpassing them, not outgrowing them, not becoming a mirror that reflects what they fear they lack. This desire is rarely conscious. It hides behind support that subtly cools when you succeed. Compliments become quieter. Advice turns cautious. The enthusiasm they once showed for your journey fades the moment your growth challenges the unspoken hierarchy between you. Your success forces comparison, and comparison awakens insecurity. This is why some people are supportive during your struggles, but distant during your wins. Your pain makes them feel needed. Your progress makes them feel replaceable. When you rise, it disrupts the balance that once made them comfortable. Instead of celebrating, they retreat, minimize, or subtly redirect the focus back to themselves. The danger lies in mistaking familiarity for alignment. Shared history does not guarantee shared ambition for your future. Some people anchor you to the version of you that made them feel safe, known, or superior. Understanding this truth sharpens your awareness. It teaches you to notice who celebrates without reservation and who grows quieter as you grow stronger. It reminds you that real support does not compete with your progress. And once you see the difference, you stop shrinking to protect others and start honoring the version of you that is meant to expand. Silence is often a deliberate choice, not confusion. This truth is difficult to accept because silence is easy to excuse and even easier to misunderstand. It's comforting to believe that people are unsure, overwhelmed, or unaware. But in many cases, silence is intentional. It is a decision made to avoid responsibility, discomfort, or accountability. Choosing not to respond is often the simplest way to retain control without confrontation. People understand far more than they admit. They know when they've hurt you. They sense when something needs to be addressed. Silence becomes a shield, one that allows them to delay, detach, or distance themselves without having to explain why. It preserves their comfort while leaving you suspended in uncertainty. Silence also shifts the emotional burden. The unanswered questions, the second-guessing, the self-blame all fall on the person waiting. This imbalance is powerful. By saying nothing, someone can maintain the upper hand, forcing the other person to fill the gaps with doubt and interpretation. This doesn't mean all silence is cruel or calculated. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is avoidance. But even avoidance is a choice. Not responding is still a response. It communicates priorities, boundaries, and willingness to engage. Understanding this truth brings clarity. It helps you stop chasing explanations that will never come. It teaches you to listen to behavior instead of words. When someone consistently chooses silence, They are telling you exactly how much space you occupy in their life, and that message is often clearer than any explanation could ever be. People will watch you struggle before they help. This truth is painful because it forces you to confront how conditional compassion often is. Many people notice your struggle long before they acknowledge it. They see the signs, sense the weight you're carrying, and recognize the difficulty, but they wait. Not always out of cruelty, but out of hesitation, discomfort, or self-preservation. Helping requires involvement, and involvement carries responsibility. When someone steps in, they risk inconvenience, emotional labor, or becoming entangled in something they can't easily walk away from. So instead, they observe. They tell themselves you're strong, that you'll figure it out, that someone else will intervene. Waiting becomes a way to avoid obligation while still appearing concerned. There is also an unspoken test embedded in this behavior. Some people wait to see how much you can endure, how you handle pressure, or whether your struggle will resolve itself. Only when the situation becomes undeniable or when helping no longer costs much do they act. By then, the damage has often already settled in. This is why struggling in silence can feel so lonely. You realize that being seen does not guarantee being supported. Awareness does not equal action. Many people need proof of collapse before they offer care. Understanding this truth reshapes expectations. It teaches you not to measure your worth by who steps in or how quickly. It makes you more intentional about asking for help instead of waiting to be rescued. And it reminds you that those who help early without being asked are rare and revealing. Being needed is not the same as being loved. This truth is dangerous because being needed can feel intoxicating. It creates a sense of purpose, importance, and belonging. When someone depends on you, it feels like proof that you matter. But need is rooted in lack, not affection. It ties your value to what you provide rather than who you are. When you are needed, your presence is conditional. You are appreciated as long as you solve problems, offer stability, or carry emotional weight. The moment you step back, grow tired, or require support yourself, the dynamic shifts. Frustration replaces gratitude. Disappointment appears where care once seemed to exist. Love, by contrast, does not collapse when dependency fades. It allows space, independence, and mutual strength. Love wants you whole, not depleted. Need wants you available, predictable, and useful. This is why relationships built on need often feel heavy. You sense the pressure to maintain a role rather than simply exist. The most painful realization comes when you stop being useful and discover how little remains. The calls slow, the appreciation fades. What felt like closeness reveals itself as reliance, not attachment. Understanding this truth teaches you to examine why people stay. It encourages you to notice whether someone supports your independence or resists it. It reminds you that real love does not trap you in obligation. And once you see the difference, you stop confusing exhaustion with connection and start seeking relationships that choose you, not just need you. Most friendships are situational. This truth becomes clear when circumstances change and familiar faces quietly fade away. Many friendships are formed around proximity, routine, or shared environments rather than deep alignment. School, work, neighborhoods, phases of life, mutual struggles, these situations create connection, but they also limit it. When the situation ends, the bond often weakens without conflict or closure. People don't always leave because they stop caring. They leave because the structure that held the friendship together disappears. Without regular contact or shared context, effort is required, and effort exposes intention. Some people are only meant to walk alongside you during a specific chapter, not the entire story. This can feel like betrayal, but it's often nature. Situational friendships thrive on convenience and shared experience, not commitment. When growth pulls people in different directions, maintaining the connection requires energy many are unwilling or unable to give. Silence replaces conversation, and distance replaces familiarity. The pain comes from assuming permanence where there was only proximity. Time spent together can create the illusion of depth. Shared laughter, late nights, and mutual support feel solid, but without intention, they remain fragile. When life shifts, so do the relationships built around it. Understanding this truth helps you release resentment. It teaches you not to measure friendship by longevity alone, but by presence when the situation no longer demands it. The rare friendships that survive distance and change stand out precisely because most do not. People project their insecurities onto you. This truth explains why criticism often says more about the speaker than the target. When people feel threatened, inadequate, or uncertain about themselves, those emotions don't stay contained. Instead, they look for somewhere to land. Projection becomes a defense mechanism, a way to offload discomfort without confronting its source. When someone accuses you of being arrogant, distant, selfish, or incapable, it is often a reflection of what they fear within themselves. Your confidence highlights their doubt. Your boundaries expose their lack of them. Your growth forces them to face their stagnation. Rather than processing these feelings internally, they redirect them outward, placing them on you. Projection feels convincing because it is emotionally charged. The person truly believes what they are saying in that moment. Their reaction is real, even if the accusation isn't. This is what makes projection so confusing. You may find yourself questioning your behavior, apologizing for traits you don't possess, or shrinking to avoid conflict you never created. The emotional toll comes from internalizing someone else's unresolved struggles. Over time, repeated projection can distort your self-perception if you aren't aware of what's happening. You begin to carry labels that were never yours to begin with. Understanding this truth creates emotional distance without bitterness. It teaches you to pause before accepting blame, to ask whether the criticism aligns with your actions or with someone else's wounds. And once you recognize projection for what it is, you stop defending yourself against reflections that were never about you. Trust is assumed faster than it's earned. This truth is subtle because trust often feels like a moral instinct rather than a risky leap. People are quick to assume trust based on familiarity, shared experiences, or emotional closeness. A few conversations, a shared struggle, or time spent together can create the illusion that trust already exists, even when it hasn't been tested. Humans crave safety and connection, and trust feels like the bridge to both. To trust quickly is comforting. It reduces uncertainty and creates emotional ease. But assumed trust is fragile because it's built on expectation, not evidence. It relies on how someone makes you feel, not how they behave under pressure. This is why betrayal often feels shocking. The trust was never earned through consistency or accountability. It was granted through proximity and hope. People reveal who they are not during calm moments, but when choices are inconvenient, when stakes are high, and when honesty costs them something. Assumed trust skips the slow process of observation. It overlooks patterns, dismisses small warning signs, and fills gaps with optimism. It confuses openness with reliability and vulnerability with integrity. Understanding this truth teaches patience. It reminds you that trust should grow from repeated actions, not emotional intensity. That time alone proves nothing without consistency. And once you learn to let trust be built rather than given, you protect yourself from expectations that were never meant to be met. Many people lie to avoid discomfort, not to be cruel. This truth challenges the assumption that dishonesty is always driven by malice. In reality, many lies are born from fear of confrontation, rejection, disappointment, or emotional intensity. For some people, discomfort feels more threatening than dishonesty, so lying becomes a coping mechanism rather than a weapon. Avoidance shapes much of human behavior. When faced with difficult conversations or uncomfortable truths, people often choose the path that preserves immediate peace. Small lies are used to smooth tension, protect self-image, or escape accountability. In the moment, these lies feel harmless, even necessary. The long-term consequences are rarely considered. This is why people may lie even when the truth would be simpler. Honesty requires emotional courage. It risks conflict, vulnerability, and judgment. For those who are conflict-averse or emotionally immature, lying feels safer than being real. The lie becomes a shield against discomfort, not an attempt to harm. However, the impact of these lies is still damaging. Avoidance does not eliminate truth, it only delays it. When the truth eventually surfaces, it often carries more weight, more pain, and more betrayal than it would have originally. The intention may not have been cruelty, but the result often feels the same. Understanding this truth helps you interpret behavior without excusing it. It teaches you to recognize that fear often drives dishonesty, but fear does not absolve responsibility. And once you see how often lies are used to protect comfort, you begin to value rare, uncomfortable honesty even more. You are replaceable in most roles. This truth is difficult to accept because it confronts the idea that effort guarantees permanence. In many areas of life, work, friendships, social circles, your role matters more than your individuality. What you do is valued more than who you are. As long as the function is fulfilled, the person filling it can be swapped without much disruption. This doesn't mean you lack worth. It means systems prioritize continuity over attachment. Jobs replace employees, groups replace contributors, and even relationships can replace emotional roles when convenience demands it. The world is structured to keep moving, not to pause for sentiment. Once you understand this, the shock of being replaced becomes less personal and more structural. The pain comes from over-identifying with roles. When you invest your identity into being the helper, the provider, the reliable one, losing that position feels like losing yourself. But the truth is, people often miss the service, not the individual. The function you performed becomes the absence they notice. This is why loyalty tied to roles is fragile. When someone else can offer similar value with less effort or cost, replacement becomes easy. History, sacrifice, and dedication don't always outweigh convenience. Understanding this truth shifts how you invest your energy. It encourages you to build identity beyond usefulness and attachment beyond roles. When you stop tying your self-worth to being irreplaceable, you gain freedom. You choose where to show up not to secure your place, but because it aligns with who you are, whether or not you are easily replaced. People justify their behavior before they question it. This truth reveals how deeply the human ego protects itself. When people act in ways that cause harm, discomfort, or conflict, their first instinct is rarely reflection. Instead, they search for reasons that make their actions feel acceptable. Justification comes faster than accountability because questioning oneself threatens identity, and most people would rather defend who they believe they are than confront who they might be. The mind is skilled at self-protection. It reframes actions, edits memories, and highlights intentions over impact. "I didn't mean to" becomes more important than "I caused harm." Circumstances are blamed, emotions are cited, and responsibility is softened until it feels bearable. This process allows people to move forward without the discomfort of guilt or change. True self-examination requires humility, and humility is uncomfortable. It demands sitting with the possibility of being wrong, of having failed, of needing to grow. Many people avoid this by building narratives that absolve them before any real questioning begins. Over time, these narratives harden into beliefs, making change even less likely. This is why patterns repeat. When behavior is justified instead of examined, lessons are never learned. Apologies are given, but insight is missing. Damage is acknowledged, but not understood. Understanding this truth changes how you listen. You begin to hear when explanations are shields rather than reflections. It teaches you that real growth starts after justification ends. And once you recognize how quickly people protect their behavior, You stop expecting self-awareness where comfort is being prioritized. Boundaries offend those who benefit from you having none. This truth becomes obvious the moment you stop over-explaining, over-giving, or overextending yourself. Boundaries don't create problems, they reveal them. The people who react the strongest are often the ones who were quietly profiting from your lack of limits. What once felt normal to them suddenly feels like restriction. When you have no boundaries, you are predictable and accessible. Your time, energy, and emotional labor are easy to claim. Introducing boundaries disrupts that flow. It forces others to adjust, to ask, to respect. For some, this feels unfair, not because your boundary is unreasonable, but because the benefit they enjoyed is being removed. This is why boundaries are often labeled as selfish, cold, or dramatic. Framing your self-protection as a flaw allows others to avoid examining their own entitlement. Instead of acknowledging the imbalance, they focus on your change. The discomfort they feel is projected onto you. Boundaries also expose intentions. Those who value you will adapt, even if it takes time. Those who valued what you provided will resist. The resistance itself becomes information. It shows whether the relationship was built on mutual respect or quiet exploitation. Understanding this truth changes how you respond to backlash. It helps you stop defending your right to protect yourself. You realize that offense is not proof of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's simply evidence that access has been revoked. And once you see who reacts to your boundaries with hostility, you gain clarity about who truly respected you in the first place. Some people only value you when you're useful. This truth reveals itself slowly, often disguised as appreciation. As long as you are solving problems, offering support, providing access, or making life easier, you are welcomed and acknowledged. Your presence is praised, your efforts noticed, your involvement encouraged, but the value placed on you is tied directly to what you contribute, not who you are. The moment your usefulness declines, the tone changes. Messages slow down, invitations stop, interest fades, not because you did something wrong, but because the exchange no longer benefits them. For some people, relationships are measured by output. When the output stops, so does the connection. This dynamic often goes unnoticed because usefulness can feel like purpose. Being relied on creates a sense of importance. It feels good to be needed. But being needed is fragile. It places your worth outside of yourself, dependent on constant performance. The more you give, the more is expected, until giving becomes your only role. The emotional damage appears when you can no longer show up in the same way. Illness, exhaustion, boundaries, or growth expose the truth. You realize that when you stopped being useful, you stopped being valued. The affection was conditional, the attention transactional. Understanding this truth changes how you give. It teaches you to watch what happens when you take a step back. It encourages you to offer support by choice, not obligation. And once you recognize who values your usefulness more than your presence, you gain clarity about where your energy truly belongs. Popularity is often confused with character. This truth exists because visibility is louder than integrity. When someone is widely liked, followed, or admired, it creates the illusion of substance. Approval becomes mistaken for virtue, and attention is interpreted as evidence of worth. The more people gather around someone, the easier it is to assume they must be good, trustworthy, or deserving. Popularity is built on appeal, not depth. It rewards what is agreeable, entertaining, or validating to the majority. Character, on the other hand, is revealed in private moments, difficult choices, and unpopular decisions. It does not announce itself. It often goes unnoticed because it refuses to perform. This confusion persists because humans look to others for cues. If many people approve of someone, it feels safer to do the same. Questioning a popular figure requires independent judgment, and independence is uncomfortable. It risks social friction, exclusion, or being wrong alone. The danger is that popularity can mask harmful traits. Charm can hide manipulation. Confidence can conceal insecurity. Likability can coexist with dishonesty. When attention becomes the measure of character, behavior goes unexamined and patterns are excused. Understanding this truth sharpens discernment. It teaches you to separate how someone is received from how they behave when no one is watching. It reminds you that character is proven through consistency, not applause. And once you see how easily admiration replaces evaluation, you stop equating being liked with being good. People change when they no longer need you. This truth is painful because it exposes how conditional many connections really are. While someone depends on you for support, guidance, validation, or stability, they remain close, attentive, and invested. Need creates attachment. But when that need fades, when they gain confidence, resources, or alternatives, the relationship often shifts without warning. The change is rarely dramatic. It shows up in delayed replies, reduced effort, and emotional distance. What once felt mutual begins to feel one-sided. This isn't always intentional cruelty. It's often unconscious reprioritization. Once the function you served is no longer required, your presence loses urgency. People don't always realize how much their behavior was anchored to need. They may believe the bond was deeper than it was. But dependence can masquerade as closeness, and gratitude can feel like loyalty until independence arrives. When people no longer rely on you, they reassess how much energy the relationship deserves. This is why transitions are so revealing. Growth, healing, or success can quietly end relationships that were built during vulnerability. The version of you that was needed is no longer present, and some people don't know how to relate to who you've become or to who they've become without you. Understanding this truth helps you separate contribution from connection. It teaches you to notice who stays when need is gone and nothing is being exchanged. Because those who remain after dependence ends are often the only ones who were truly there to begin with. Attention is often mistaken for care. This truth is dangerous because attention feels good, especially when it arrives during moments of loneliness or uncertainty. Being noticed, checked on, or engaged can create the illusion of importance. But attention and care are not the same. Attention is about focus in the moment. Care is about consistency, responsibility, and follow-through over time. Many people give attention because it costs little. A message, a compliment, a reaction, or a brief conversation can create emotional attachment without requiring commitment. This is why attention can feel intense but shallow. It sparks connection quickly, then disappears just as easily. The emotional highs are real, but the foundation is weak. Care behaves differently. It shows up when it's inconvenient. It remains present during silence, conflict, and discomfort. Care involves effort that continues even when there is nothing immediate to gain. Attention seeks stimulation. Care seeks well-being. The confusion happens when attention fills emotional gaps, when someone listens briefly, checks in occasionally, or expresses interest without depth. It can feel like support. Over time, you may invest emotionally, only to realize that when you truly need consistency, the attention fades. Understanding this truth sharpens emotional discernment. It teaches you to watch patterns instead of moments, to notice who stays engaged when things are quiet, not just when they are exciting. And once you learn the difference, you stop mistaking temporary focus for genuine concern. People fear being alone more than being unhappy together. This truth reveals how powerful the fear of isolation truly is. For many people, loneliness feels more threatening than dissatisfaction, more painful than daily discomfort. Being alone forces confrontation with thoughts, regrets, unmet needs, and the silence that exposes them. Staying unhappy together, however, provides distraction, familiarity, and the illusion of safety. Unhappiness can become predictable, and predictability feels manageable. Even when a relationship drains energy, limits growth, or causes quiet suffering, it offers routine and presence. The known pain feels less frightening than the unknown future. This is why people stay in situations they openly complain about but rarely leave. Togetherness can soften responsibility. When you are unhappy with someone else, blame can be shared, diffused, or avoided. Being alone removes that shield. It demands self-reflection and accountability, which many people would rather postpone indefinitely. This fear also keeps people from ending relationships that have expired. They cling not to love, but to the comfort of not being alone. Over time, connection turns into dependence, and tolerance is mistaken for commitment. Understanding this truth changes how you interpret staying. It teaches you that endurance is not always strength, that choosing yourself can feel terrifying before it feels freeing. And once you recognize how often fear keeps people together, you stop romanticizing persistence and start valuing the courage it takes to walk away. Most people avoid accountability if they can. This truth exists because accountability threatens the ego. To be accountable means admitting fault, acknowledging harm, and accepting consequences without excuses. For many people, this feels like a loss of control or self-worth. Avoidance becomes easier than facing discomfort, so responsibility is redirected, minimized, or quietly ignored. People often reshape the story to protect themselves. They focus on intentions instead of impact, circumstances instead of choices. Blame is softened with justifications or shifted entirely onto others. This isn't always done consciously. The mind is skilled at self-preservation, and accountability challenges the version of ourselves we want to believe in. Avoiding accountability also preserves comfort. Taking responsibility requires change, effort, and humility. It may involve repairing damage, having difficult conversations, or sitting with shame. Many would rather move on and hope time erases the issue. Silence, defensiveness, or dismissal become tools to escape responsibility without resolution. This is why patterns repeat. When accountability is avoided, lessons aren't learned. Apologies are empty, behavior stays the same, and the cycle continues. Those affected are left carrying the weight of unresolved harm while the other party feels absolved simply because the moment has passed. Understanding this truth sharpens your awareness. It teaches you to stop waiting for closure from those unwilling to own their actions. It helps you recognize that accountability is rare, not because it's unnecessary, but because it requires courage most people never develop. Compliments can be tools, not truths. This truth becomes clear when praise feels strategic rather than sincere. Compliments have power. They lower defenses, build goodwill, and create emotional openness. Because of this, they are often used deliberately to influence, to soften resistance, or to position the speaker favorably. The words may sound positive, but their purpose isn't always affirmation. Some people compliment to gain access. Others use praise to steer behavior, reinforce dependence, or keep you agreeable. A well-placed compliment can encourage you to keep giving, keep complying, or keep doubting your instincts. When praise is used this way, it is less about recognizing who you are and more about shaping how you respond. This is why certain compliments feel hollow. They focus on what benefits the speaker rather than what reflects your character. They appear when something is needed and disappear when it's not. Over time, you may notice that praise increases right before requests or during moments when control is slipping. The emotional danger lies in internalizing manipulated praise. When validation comes from external approval, compliments can quietly guide your choices. You begin to associate worth with being liked rather than being honest. Understanding this truth teaches you to examine intent, not just language. You learn to notice consistency between praise and behavior. Genuine compliments remain steady and unforced. Tools change with circumstance, and once you recognize the difference, flattery loses its power to steer you away from your own judgment. People remember favors as debts owed back. This truth is unsettling because favors are often presented as acts of kindness, not transactions. When someone helps you, it feels generous, even selfless. But beneath many favors sits an unspoken expectation. The help is remembered, logged, and stored, not as goodwill, but as leverage to be used later. This doesn't always come from malice. Many people keep mental accounts without realizing it. They recall what they gave, how often they showed up, and what it cost them. Over time, that memory quietly shifts from generosity to entitlement. The favor becomes something you are expected to repay, even if repayment was never discussed. This is why some help comes with strings attached. When you can't or won't return the favor in the way they expect, disappointment surfaces. Guilt is implied. The original kindness is reframed as sacrifice, and you are cast as ungrateful for not balancing the scale. True generosity doesn't keep score. It gives freely and releases the outcome. But many people struggle with this because giving without return feels vulnerable. Turning favors into debts creates control and predictability. Understanding this truth teaches caution. It reminds you to notice how help is framed and how it is remembered. It encourages you to value support that doesn't demand loyalty, obedience, or repayment. And once you see how easily kindness can become currency, you become more intentional about both giving and receiving. Not everyone who smiles at you wants you to win. This truth is unsettling because smiles are often mistaken for support and warmth for loyalty. Social harmony allows people to appear kind while holding completely different intentions beneath the surface. A smile can signal politeness, strategy, or self-interest just as easily as it can signal goodwill. Approval is easy to perform. Support is not. Some people stay close not to encourage your growth, but to measure themselves against it. They listen to your plans, celebrate your small successes, and nod along while quietly hoping you don't surpass them. Comparison breeds silent competition, and competition doesn't always announce itself with hostility. It often hides behind friendliness. This is why encouragement can feel thin or conditional. Praise may disappear as your success grows. Conversations subtly shift. Jokes carry an edge. The smile remains, but the energy changes. What once felt supportive begins to feel restrained, as if your progress creates discomfort rather than pride. Envy doesn't always look like jealousy. Sometimes it looks like indifference, minimization, or quiet withdrawal. People don't have to oppose you openly to resist your success. Withholding enthusiasm, support, or acknowledgement can be just as revealing. Understanding this truth teaches you to trust patterns over expressions. It reminds you that genuine support shows up in consistency, especially when you grow beyond what others expected of you. Smiles are easy to give. Wanting someone else to win without conditions is rare, and it becomes obvious through actions, not appearances. People reveal themselves when you say no. This truth surfaces the moment you stop being agreeable. Saying no disrupts expectations, especially for those who are accustomed to your compliance. It removes access, convenience, and control, forcing people to confront boundaries they may have quietly relied on. Their reaction in that moment often tells you more than years of interaction. Some respond with understanding, respect, or indifference. Others react with guilt, pressure, anger, or withdrawal. These responses are rarely about the request itself. They are about what your yes once provided. When you say no, you remove a benefit, and people reveal how much of the relationship was built around receiving rather than mutual respect. This is why no feels uncomfortable. It creates friction where ease once existed. People who benefited from your openness may frame your boundary as selfishness or distance. They may question your character, your loyalty, or your intentions, all in an effort to restore the old dynamic. The emotional clarity comes from observing behavior rather than explanations. Someone who respects you will respect your no without demanding justification. Someone who doesn't will see your boundary as a personal threat. Understanding this truth transforms no into a tool of awareness. It helps you identify who values your autonomy and who values your compliance. And once you see how quickly a simple refusal exposes intent, you stop fearing no and start using it as a filter for who deserves continued access to you. Emotional maturity is uncommon. This truth becomes clear when you notice how many adults still react rather than respond. Emotional maturity isn't about age, intelligence, or experience. It's about the ability to regulate emotions, take responsibility, and communicate without avoidance or aggression. Many people never develop this skill because it requires sustained self-awareness and discomfort. Emotionally immature individuals are often ruled by their feelings. When hurt, they withdraw or attack. When confronted, they deflect or blame. When uncomfortable, they avoid. Instead of processing emotions, they act them out. This creates cycles of misunderstanding, silent resentment, and unresolved conflict that repeat endlessly. Emotional maturity demands accountability. It requires admitting fault without excuses, listening without preparing a defense, and choosing clarity over comfort. These behaviors threaten the ego, which is why they are rare. It's easier to protect pride than to repair connection. This scarcity becomes most visible in close relationships. Emotional immaturity turns simple issues into power struggles and honest conversations into emotional minefields. Needs go unspoken, boundaries are violated, and problems are buried rather than solved. Understanding this truth reshapes expectations. It teaches you to stop assuming that good intentions equal emotional skill. It helps you recognize when someone lacks the capacity to meet you where you are. And once you see how uncommon emotional maturity truly is, you become more selective with who you open up to and more patient with yourself for needing distance. Many people prefer comfort over honesty. This truth explains why difficult conversations are avoided and hard truths are softened or buried entirely. Honesty can disrupt harmony, challenge self-image, and invite conflict. Comfort, on the other hand, preserves peace in the moment. For many people, emotional ease is valued more than clarity, even when that ease is built on avoidance. Choosing comfort often means saying what's safe instead of what's true. It means agreeing outwardly while disagreeing inwardly. It means staying silent to avoid tension, even when silence allows misunderstandings to grow. The short-term relief feels worth it, while the long-term damage is postponed and ignored. Honesty requires courage. It asks people to risk being misunderstood, disliked, or rejected. Comfort asks nothing. It allows people to maintain relationships without confronting reality. Over time, this preference creates shallow connections, relationships that appear stable but lack depth and authenticity. This is why truths are often revealed too late. When honesty is delayed, resentment builds quietly. By the time the truth surfaces, it arrives distorted by frustration or distance. What could have been resolved early becomes irreversible. Understanding this truth shifts your expectations. It helps you stop waiting for honesty from those who value comfort more than growth. It also challenges you to examine your own choices, whether you speak to preserve peace or to preserve truth. Because while comfort feels safe, honesty is what allows relationships to remain real. People protect their image before protecting people. This truth becomes evident in moments where honesty would cost reputation. When faced with the choice between doing what is right and preserving how they are perceived, many people instinctively choose appearance. Image offers safety. It shields ego, status, and social standing, while protecting people requires accountability, vulnerability, and risk. This is why harm is often minimized, denied, or reframed. Acknowledging wrongdoing threatens the story people tell about themselves. Instead of addressing the impact on others, energy is spent managing narratives, justifying actions, or shifting blame. The priority becomes how the situation looks rather than how it feels to those affected. Image thrives in silence and ambiguity. By avoiding direct responsibility, people maintain approval while allowing damage to linger. Apologies are crafted carefully. Truth is softened or withheld. The goal is not repair, but preservation of identity. The emotional cost of this truth is heavy for those on the receiving end. You realize that your pain is inconvenient, your honesty disruptive. Protecting you would require someone to stand exposed, and many are unwilling to do that. Understanding this truth sharpens discernment. It teaches you to watch actions during moments of conflict, not harmony, to notice who defends character instead of addressing harm. And once you see how quickly image takes priority over people, you stop expecting integrity from those more invested in how they are seen than in who they affect. Time exposes intentions faster than words. This truth exists because words are easy to control, but behavior is not. People can say almost anything in the moment, make promises, express concern, declare loyalty, or speak with conviction. Words are shaped by emotion, image, and desire. Time, however, removes the performance. It applies pressure that reveals what someone truly prioritizes. Intentions show themselves through consistency, not declarations. Over time, patterns form. Effort either continues or fades. Presence becomes predictable or conditional. When nothing is being asked, when no reward is immediate, behavior speaks clearly. What someone does repeatedly, without prompting, tells you far more than what they claim. This is why early impressions can be misleading. In the beginning, people are motivated to impress, connect, or secure a place in your life. But sustaining care, respect, and effort requires genuine intention. Time strips away motivation rooted in convenience and leaves only what is real. This exposure is often subtle. It appears in missed follow-through, delayed responses, shifting priorities, and changing availability. Rarely dramatic, always revealing. Words may remain kind, but actions slowly contradict them. Understanding this truth teaches patience. It reminds you not to rush trust or commitment based on emotional language. It encourages you to observe instead of assume. And once you learn to let time do the work of revealing intent, you stop chasing explanations and start believing what behavior has already made clear. Some people stay only while you're strong. This truth is revealed the moment your strength falters. While you are capable, resilient, and composed, certain people remain close, drawn to the stability you provide. Your strength reassures them. It makes you useful, admirable, and safe to rely on. But when vulnerability appears, the dynamic begins to shift. Weakness makes some people uncomfortable. It disrupts the roles they assign to you. If you were the supporter, the problem solver, or the emotional anchor, your struggle forces them to confront something they were never prepared to give back. Rather than adjust, they distance themselves. This departure is rarely loud. It shows up as reduced availability, shallow check-ins, or quiet withdrawal. They don't leave because you did something wrong, but because your strength was the reason they stayed. When that strength wavers, so does their presence. Some people admire resilience without understanding the cost of it. They enjoy the benefits of your stability, but are unwilling to sit with your pain. Strength becomes a condition rather than a quality, and once the condition fails, so does the connection. Understanding this truth reshapes how you view loyalty. It teaches you to notice who remains when you are tired, uncertain, or struggling. Those who stay during your weakest moments reveal something rare and valuable. Because anyone can stand beside strength, but only a few are willing to stand beside humanity. People often take more than they give. This truth becomes apparent when you look at effort over time rather than isolated moments. Many relationships feel balanced at first, but slowly shift as one person gives consistently while the other grows accustomed to receiving. Taking is rarely aggressive. It is gradual, quiet, and often unacknowledged. The more someone accepts without reciprocating, the more normal the imbalance feels. People justify taking in subtle ways. They tell themselves you don't mind, that you're better at handling things, that you're strong enough to carry more. Over time, your generosity is reclassified as your role. What you offer freely becomes what is expected, and expectation replaces gratitude. This is why imbalance can persist unnoticed. You may not realize how much you're giving until exhaustion sets in. By then, the other person has grown comfortable with the dynamic. Giving less feels like a loss to them, even if the exchange was never equal. The emotional toll comes from being valued for what you provide rather than for mutual effort. You begin to feel drained, unseen, or quietly resentful, especially when your needs are minimized while theirs are met without question. Understanding this truth teaches you to observe patterns, not intentions. It reminds you that healthy relationships require reciprocity, not sacrifice disguised as kindness. And once you recognize how easily giving can turn into taking, you become more deliberate with your energy, choosing balance over obligation. Being reliable can turn you into a resource. This truth is difficult because reliability is praised as a virtue. Showing up, being consistent, and following through are qualities people admire. But when reliability is given without limits, it slowly shifts how others perceive you. Instead of being seen as a person with needs, you begin to be seen as a solution that's always available. People adapt quickly to dependability. What starts as appreciation turns into expectation. Your consistency becomes assumed, not acknowledged. The more you handle, fix, and support, the less others feel the need to ask if you can. Your reliability fills gaps so smoothly that its cost becomes invisible. This transformation is subtle. You are contacted when something is needed, not when something is shared. Your presence is associated with function rather than connection. Over time, you may notice that your struggles receive less attention than your usefulness. The role you play overshadows who you are. This happens because humans naturally optimize. When someone proves they can be counted on, responsibility shifts toward them. Without boundaries, reliability invites extraction. People don't always intend to take advantage. They simply adjust to what's available. Understanding this truth teaches balance. It reminds you that being dependable should not mean being endlessly accessible. That reliability must be paired with self-respect. And once you recognize when consistency is turning into expectation, you learn to protect your energy before it becomes something others consume rather than appreciate. People judge silently while acting polite. This truth exists because social survival often depends on appearances. Politeness is a social mask that allows people to coexist without conflict, even when judgment is present beneath the surface. Smiles, nods, and agreeable words can easily conceal criticism, assumptions, and quiet evaluations. Courtesy does not require understanding, only restraint. Most judgments are never spoken because expressing them carries risk. It can create tension, expose insecurity, or invite disagreement. Silence feels safer, so opinions are formed internally, reinforced privately, and carried forward without ever being challenged. The person being judged remains unaware, while the judgment itself shapes how they are treated. This is why energy can shift without explanation. You may feel distance, subtle coldness, or reduced respect without knowing why. The judgment has already happened. It lives in tone, body language, and behavior, even if words remain pleasant. Silent judgment is powerful because it avoids accountability. When nothing is said, nothing can be addressed. Assumptions harden into beliefs without evidence, and impressions are treated as facts. Politeness becomes a way to disengage emotionally while maintaining social order. Understanding this truth helps you stop overanalyzing surface behavior. It reminds you that kindness does not always equal acceptance. It encourages you to focus less on being liked and more on being aligned with yourself. Because silent judgment is inevitable, but living to avoid it quietly costs more than most people realize. Most people don't want truth, they want reassurance. This truth explains why honesty often creates discomfort rather than relief. Truth challenges self-perception, disrupts comforting narratives, and forces reflection. Reassurance, on the other hand, preserves emotional stability. It tells people they are right, safe, and justified, even when growth would require facing something difficult. Many people ask for honesty, but what they are really seeking is confirmation. They want their fears soothed, their decisions validated, and their identity protected. When truth aligns with reassurance, it is welcomed. When it doesn't, it is resisted, dismissed, or reframed as negativity. The issue isn't the truth itself, but the threat it poses to emotional comfort. This is why honest voices are often labeled as harsh or unsupportive. Truth removes illusion. It doesn't always feel kind, even when it is necessary. Reassurance feels gentle because it avoids confrontation, but it also avoids change. The emotional tension appears when you realize that being truthful can distance you from others. Offering honesty instead of comfort may make you less liked, even if it is more helpful. Many people prefer emotional safety over clarity. Understanding this truth teaches discernment in communication. It helps you recognize when truth is being asked for and when reassurance is being sought instead. And once you see how often comfort is chosen over clarity, you stop taking resistance to truth personally and begin choosing honesty with intention rather than expectation. People excuse their actions but judge yours. This truth exists because most people view the world through a lens that protects their self-image. When they make mistakes, they look inward at context, stress, intention, and circumstances. When you make mistakes, they look outward at results and behavior. Their actions are explained, yours are evaluated. This double standard is rarely deliberate. It's a psychological reflex. People experience their own struggles intimately, but they only see fragments of yours. This makes it easy for them to justify their behavior as understandable while labeling yours as flawed, careless, or wrong. Intent becomes the shield. "I didn't mean to" is used to soften responsibility, while your intentions are ignored in favor of impact. Over time, this imbalance creates quiet resentment. You feel misunderstood, held to stricter standards, and expected to show grace that is rarely returned. This is especially visible in conflict. People defend themselves immediately, often before listening. Accountability feels like threat, so justification arrives first. Judgment, however, feels safe when directed outward. Understanding this truth sharpens awareness. It teaches you not to internalize unfair evaluations. It reminds you that judgment often says more about the judge than the behavior being judged. And once you recognize this pattern, you stop over-explaining yourself and start trusting your own understanding of your intentions and actions. Familiar pain feels safer than uncertain change. This truth explains why people stay in situations that slowly drain them. Pain that is known becomes predictable. Even when it hurts, it feels manageable because it follows a pattern. The mind learns what to expect, how to endure it, and how to survive within it. Uncertainty, on the other hand, threatens stability, even if it promises relief. The brain is wired to prioritize safety over happiness. Familiar pain offers a sense of control. You know where it hurts, when it will hurt, and how bad it will be. Change removes that certainty. It introduces unknown risks, unfamiliar discomfort, and the possibility of failure. For many, that unknown feels more dangerous than suffering they already understand. This is why people remain in unhealthy relationships, unfulfilling jobs, and limiting identities. The pain becomes part of their normal. Leaving would require rebuilding, redefining, and risking disappointment. Staying requires only endurance. Over time, familiarity dulls urgency. What once felt intolerable becomes routine. The cost is paid slowly, in emotional numbness rather than immediate crisis. People convince themselves that stability equals safety, even when it's quietly destructive. Understanding this truth shifts how you view resistance to change. It helps you see that hesitation is often fear disguised as practicality. It reminds you that growth always involves uncertainty, and that choosing the familiar does not mean choosing peace. Sometimes it simply means choosing the pain you already know how to survive. People notice your absence more than your presence. This truth becomes clear when consistency turns invisible. When you are reliably present, supportive, and available, your contributions blend into the background of everyday life. What you offer becomes part of the environment rather than something consciously acknowledged. Presence, when constant, loses its contrast. Absence disrupts that familiarity. The moment you step back, stop showing up, or remove access, the space you once filled becomes obvious. What was unnoticed suddenly feels missing. The silence is louder than your steady presence ever was. This is not because people didn't benefit from you before, but because humans are more sensitive to loss than to continuity. This is why appreciation often arrives late. People adjust to what is always there, assuming it will remain. Gratitude fades not from lack of value, but from overexposure. Your presence is expected, your absence is felt. The emotional weight of this truth lies in realizing that being consistent doesn't guarantee being recognized. You can give quietly for a long time and still be overlooked until you stop. When you do, reactions surface: confusion, concern, or sudden interest. But they are responses to disruption, not awareness. Understanding this truth shifts how you measure your worth. It teaches you not to wait for recognition that only arrives when you're gone. And once you see how absence creates clarity, you become more intentional about where and how you show up, knowing that constant presence is rarely acknowledged in the moment. Some people confuse control with love. This truth is dangerous because control often disguises itself as care. It shows up as concern, protection, or involvement, making it easy to mistake for devotion. When someone monitors your choices, questions your independence, or limits your freedom, it can feel like they are invested in you. But love seeks growth. Control seeks certainty. Control is rooted in fear: fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of losing influence. Instead of trusting, controlling people manage. They justify restrictions as worry, possessiveness as passion, and intrusion as closeness. Over time, their need to regulate you becomes framed as proof of how much they care. Love respects autonomy. It allows space without suspicion and supports individuality without punishment. Control, however, tightens when independence appears. The more you assert yourself, the more resistance you face. What was once framed as affection becomes pressure, guilt, or emotional leverage. This confusion often leaves people doubting themselves. They feel ungrateful for wanting freedom, as if independence is a betrayal. Slowly, boundaries erode, and self-expression shrinks to maintain peace. Understanding this truth restores clarity. It teaches you to observe whether care empowers or restricts. It reminds you that love does not require surrendering control over your life. And once you see how easily control can masquerade as affection, you become more protective of your autonomy and more honest about what love should feel like. People treat others how they treat themselves. This truth reveals why behavior is often more about the person acting than the person receiving it. The way someone speaks, listens, reacts, or withdraws is usually a reflection of their internal world. People project their self-relationship outward. The standards they hold for themselves become the standards they apply to others. When someone is harsh, critical, or dismissive, it often mirrors the voice they live with internally. When someone struggles with self-respect, they may tolerate or inflict disrespect without fully recognizing it. Likewise, those who extend patience and compassion often do so because they have learned to give it to themselves first. This doesn't mean behavior is excusable, but it is revealing. Patterns of neglect, control, or inconsistency usually originate from unresolved internal conflicts. People can only offer what they have access to within themselves. If they lack emotional safety, they cannot provide it. If they deny themselves grace, they struggle to extend it outward. This is why certain behaviors repeat across relationships. Until someone changes how they relate to themselves, they will carry the same patterns into every connection. New people don't create new behavior, they simply receive existing ones. Understanding this truth helps you depersonalize mistreatment without tolerating it. It allows you to recognize that someone's actions are information, not a verdict on your worth. It also reminds you that how you treat yourself sets the baseline for how you allow others to treat you. Good intentions don't erase damage. This truth challenges the comforting belief that meaning well is enough. Many people cause harm without malice, and they rely on their intentions as protection against responsibility. When confronted, they point to what they meant, not what they did. The focus shifts away from impact and toward internal justification. Intentions exist privately. Damage exists in reality. You can care deeply and still hurt someone. You can try your best and still cause lasting effects. When harm is measured by intention rather than impact, the injured person is left carrying both the pain and the burden of explaining why it matters. This is why phrases meant to soften accountability often feel dismissive. They prioritize the emotional comfort of the person who caused harm over the experience of the person who received it. Acknowledging damage requires humility and the willingness to accept that good intentions do not guarantee good outcomes. The emotional weight of this truth lies in being asked to forgive something that was never fully owned. When damage is minimized, healing is delayed. Repair cannot happen without recognition. Understanding this truth reframes responsibility. It teaches that accountability begins where intention ends. It reminds you that care is proven through response, not motivation. And once you grasp that harm is not undone by meaning well, you begin to value those who listen to impact, accept consequences, and change behavior over those who hide behind their intentions. People hear what supports their beliefs. This truth exists because the human mind is not designed to seek truth first. It is designed to seek coherence. People filter information through what they already believe, accepting what aligns and dismissing what threatens their worldview. Listening becomes selective, not deliberate. What confirms is absorbed. What challenges is resisted. Beliefs form identity. When those beliefs are questioned, it feels personal, as if the self is under attack. To avoid that discomfort, people unconsciously reinterpret words, ignore nuance, or reduce complex ideas into fragments that feel familiar. They aren't truly hearing you, they're scanning for validation. This is why conversations often feel circular. You explain carefully, yet the response reflects something you never said. Your words are reshaped to fit their existing narrative. Evidence becomes debatable, tone becomes the focus, and meaning is lost. This pattern isn't about intelligence, it's about emotional safety. Changing beliefs requires admitting uncertainty, and letting go of certainty feels destabilizing, so people protect their beliefs the way they protect themselves. Understanding this truth changes how you communicate. It teaches you to recognize when you're being listened to and when you're being filtered. It reminds you that clarity doesn't guarantee understanding. And once you see how strongly beliefs guide perception, you stop expecting openness from those who are invested in staying convinced. Help is sometimes offered to feel superior. This truth is uncomfortable because help is usually framed as selfless and kind. While much help is genuine, some assistance is offered not to support, but to elevate the giver. In these moments, help becomes a way to establish hierarchy rather than connection. The act looks generous on the surface, but the motivation is rooted in control or validation. When help is used to feel superior, it often comes with subtle conditions. It may be accompanied by reminders, advice that wasn't asked for, or expectations of gratitude. The helper positions themselves as capable and above, while the receiver is silently cast as lacking or dependent. The imbalance is intentional, even if unspoken. This kind of help can feel heavy. Instead of relief, it creates obligation. Instead of empowerment, it reinforces inadequacy. The giver gains a sense of importance, while the receiver feels smaller, indebted, or scrutinized. The help is less about solving the problem and more about being seen as the solution. This dynamic is common in relationships where power matters. Offering help becomes a way to maintain relevance, authority, or moral advantage. Refusing the help can even trigger offense because the offer was never just about support, it was about status. Understanding this truth teaches you to pay attention to how help feels, not just how it looks. Genuine help leaves you stronger and more autonomous. Help offered to feel superior leaves you aware of the imbalance. Once you recognize the difference, you become more selective about what you accept and from whom. People forgive when it benefits them. This truth reveals the transactional side of forgiveness that is rarely acknowledged. Forgiveness is often presented as a moral virtue, but in practice, many people extend it when it serves a purpose. When holding on to resentment is inconvenient, exhausting, or socially uncomfortable, forgiveness becomes a practical solution rather than an emotional resolution. People are more likely to forgive when forgiveness restores access, peace, or advantage. If forgiving allows a relationship to continue, avoids conflict, or maintains stability, it becomes appealing. When forgiveness requires no sacrifice, it is offered easily, but when it demands vulnerability, trust, or risk, it is delayed or withheld. This is why forgiveness can feel selective. The same behavior may be forgiven in one context and condemned in another. The difference lies in outcome. If forgiving improves their situation, it happens. If it doesn't, the grievance remains alive. The emotional tension appears when forgiveness is used as leverage. It can be granted conditionally, revoked when inconvenient, or offered without true resolution. In these cases, forgiveness is less about healing and more about control or self-interest. Understanding this truth reshapes expectations. It teaches you that forgiveness is not always proof of growth or empathy. Sometimes it is simply a strategic choice. And once you recognize when forgiveness is driven by benefit rather than understanding, you stop equating being forgiven with being understood or repaired. Many relationships survive on habit, not care. This truth is unsettling because longevity is often mistaken for depth. When people stay connected for a long time, it feels meaningful, even reassuring. But time alone does not guarantee care. Many relationships continue simply because they are familiar, routine, and easier to maintain than to end. Habit creates comfort without intention. People keep showing up not because they are emotionally invested, but because the pattern exists. Calls are made out of routine, conversations repeat themselves, and presence becomes automatic. The relationship persists, but the attention within it slowly fades. Care requires effort. It asks for curiosity, empathy, and emotional responsiveness. Habit requires none of that. It allows people to stay connected while avoiding growth, vulnerability, or difficult conversations. Over time, the relationship becomes predictable but emotionally thin. This is why some connections feel stagnant rather than supportive. You may notice that your growth isn't truly seen, your struggles aren't deeply engaged with, and your presence feels replaceable. The bond exists, but the care that once fueled it no longer does. Understanding this truth reshapes how you evaluate closeness. It teaches you to look beyond duration and routine. It reminds you that real care adapts as you change. And once you recognize the difference between consistency and intention, you stop mistaking habit for love and start seeking relationships that are actively chosen, not merely repeated. People remember insults longer than praise. This truth exists because the human mind is wired to protect itself from harm, not to catalog kindness. Negative experiences register more deeply than positive ones because they signal threat. An insult activates emotion, self-doubt, and alertness, embedding itself into memory far more firmly than praise ever could. Praise often feels fleeting. It is absorbed briefly, then dismissed or forgotten. Insults, however, linger. They replay in the mind, reshaped by insecurity and emotion. Even a single careless remark can outweigh years of encouragement, not because the praise was meaningless, but because the brain assigns more weight to what hurts. This is why people can recall exact words spoken in moments of embarrassment or criticism long after the context has faded. The emotional charge binds the memory. Over time, these moments can shape self-perception, influence behavior, and quietly alter confidence. This doesn't mean people intentionally ignore praise. Often they struggle to fully believe it. Compliments may conflict with internal narratives, while insults reinforce them. The mind holds on to what confirms existing fears more tightly than what challenges them. Understanding this truth changes how you speak and how you listen. It reminds you that words carry unequal weight, and careless negativity can cause lasting damage. It also teaches you to be cautious about internalizing criticism, recognizing that its persistence in your mind is not proof of its truth, but evidence of how the brain prioritizes pain over reassurance. Some people stay close to monitor, not support. This truth is unsettling because closeness is usually associated with care. We assume proximity means protection, loyalty, or concern. But for some people, staying close is not about helping you grow. It's about watching, measuring, and maintaining awareness of your position relative to theirs. Monitoring disguised as closeness often feels subtly uncomfortable. There is interest without encouragement, presence without warmth. They know details about your life, your plans, your struggles, yet offer little genuine support. Their questions feel more investigative than caring. Their attention is constant, but their help is conditional or absent. This behavior is often rooted in insecurity or comparison. By staying close, they reduce uncertainty. They want to know where you stand, how you're doing, whether you're ahead or falling behind. Supporting you fully might mean empowering you beyond their comfort, so they remain nearby without contributing to your progress. The emotional damage comes from mistaking surveillance for solidarity. You may feel watched rather than held, known but not supported. Over time, their presence drains rather than strengthens, leaving you confused about why closeness feels heavy instead of safe. Understanding this truth sharpens intuition. It teaches you to distinguish between those who show up to lift you and those who linger to observe. And once you notice who celebrates your growth versus who only tracks it, you become more intentional about who you allow close access to your inner world. People respect confidence more than competence. This truth exists because perception often outweighs substance. Confidence is visible, assertive, and reassuring, while competence is quiet and patient. When someone speaks with certainty, takes up space, and projects assurance, others instinctively assume capability, even when evidence is thin. Confidence fills gaps that competence alone does not announce. Human beings look for cues to decide who to trust and follow. Confidence simplifies that decision. It signals direction, reduces doubt, and creates the illusion of control. Competence, however, requires observation over time. It proves itself slowly, through results and consistency, which demands patience many people don't have. This is why less capable individuals can rise quickly, while more skilled ones are overlooked. The confident voice dominates the room, while the competent one waits to be asked. Over time, authority becomes attached to presence rather than ability, and respect follows projection instead of performance. The danger lies in this imbalance. When confidence goes unchecked by competence, mistakes are excused and feedback is resisted. Meanwhile, those who are capable but understated are underestimated, expected to deliver without recognition. Understanding this truth teaches strategic awareness. It reminds you that skill alone is not always enough to be seen. It encourages you to communicate your value without abandoning authenticity. And once you see how heavily respect leans on perception, you become more intentional about how you present your competence to a world that often listens first to certainty. Emotional availability is rare and valuable. This truth becomes evident when you realize how many people are present in body but absent in connection. Emotional availability requires awareness, vulnerability, and the willingness to engage without retreating when things become uncomfortable. Many people lack this, not because they don't care, but because they've never learned how to sit with emotions, their own or anyone else's. Being emotionally available means listening without defensiveness, responding without shutting down, and staying present without needing to fix or escape. It demands effort and self-regulation. In a world that rewards distraction and avoidance, this level of engagement is uncommon. It requires people to slow down and be seen. This is why emotionally available individuals often feel rare and grounding. They create space where honesty feels safe and connection feels real. Their presence doesn't rush or dismiss. It acknowledges complexity instead of avoiding it. For those who have experienced emotional neglect or inconsistency, this kind of availability can feel almost foreign. Many relationships struggle not because of lack of affection, but because of lack of access. People care deeply, but cannot show up emotionally when it matters. Walls, habits, and fear get in the way. Understanding this truth shifts how you evaluate relationships. It teaches you to value depth over intensity and presence over performance. Emotional availability cannot be forced or demanded. When you encounter it, you recognize its worth immediately because it feels different. It feels safe, steady, and real. People often fear your growth. This truth becomes visible when your progress changes the balance of a relationship. Growth disrupts familiarity. It challenges roles, expectations, and unspoken hierarchies. When you evolve, you force others to confront what stayed the same in them, and that discomfort often manifests as resistance rather than support. Fear of your growth rarely appears as open opposition. It shows up as subtle discouragement, lack of enthusiasm, or conditional support. Compliments are quieter. Advice becomes caution. Encouragement is replaced with reminders of who you used to be. They may frame concern as care, but beneath it is anxiety about losing relevance, control, or shared identity. Some people benefit from you staying where you are. Your growth threatens their sense of stability or superiority. If you change, the dynamic changes. Supporting your evolution would require them to adapt, and adaptation feels risky. The emotional weight of this truth lies in realizing that not everyone who loves you is equipped to grow with you. Some prefer the version of you that was easier to relate to, easier to predict, easier to compare themselves against. Understanding this truth reframes resistance. It teaches you not to measure your progress by external approval. Growth often feels lonely because it separates you from those who relied on your sameness. And once you recognize fear disguised as concern, you stop shrinking to preserve comfort and continue expanding into who you are becoming. Being honest can cost you relationships. This truth is painful because honesty is often praised in theory but resisted in practice. Many people claim they value truth, yet what they actually want is comfort, validation, and emotional safety. Honesty disrupts that balance. It introduces friction, challenges self-perception, and forces conversations people are not prepared to have. When you are honest, you remove ambiguity. You name what others prefer to avoid. This clarity can feel threatening to those who rely on denial, silence, or unspoken agreements to maintain peace. Instead of addressing the truth, they may distance themselves from the person who voiced it. Honesty also exposes incompatibility. When you speak openly about your needs, values, or boundaries, it becomes harder for others to project expectations onto you. The relationship can no longer survive on assumption. For some, this is liberating. For others, it feels like loss. This is why honesty is often punished rather than appreciated. You may be labeled difficult, insensitive, or dramatic, not because you were wrong, but because you disrupted comfort. The truth becomes associated with discomfort, and you become the source of that discomfort. Understanding this truth reframes loss. It teaches you that some relationships depend on silence to survive. It reminds you that honesty doesn't destroy healthy connections. It reveals fragile ones. And once you accept that truth, you stop sacrificing your voice to preserve bonds that only exist when you stay quiet. People disappear when accountability arrives. This truth becomes clear at the moment responsibility is required instead of excuses. When actions are questioned and patterns are named, some people retreat rather than respond. Accountability forces self-examination, and for many, that confrontation feels threatening. Disappearing becomes an escape from having to acknowledge harm or change behavior. Vanishing is often easier than explaining. Silence avoids difficult conversations and protects the ego from shame or guilt. By leaving, people regain control over the narrative, convincing themselves that walking away is simpler than facing consequences. The absence feels cleaner than the discomfort of repair. This is why accountability reveals character so quickly. When someone is willing to stay present, listen, and take responsibility, the relationship deepens. When they disappear, it shows their limits. Not everyone has the emotional capacity to hold themselves accountable, especially when it challenges how they see themselves. The disappearance can feel like abandonment, but it is often self-preservation. The person avoids being seen too clearly. Facing accountability means admitting imperfection, and for some, that feels unbearable. Understanding this truth helps you stop chasing explanations. It reminds you that silence in the face of accountability is an answer in itself. When someone chooses distance over responsibility, they are showing you what they are capable of giving and what they are unwilling to face. Familiar faces don't guarantee loyalty. This truth becomes clear when comfort is mistaken for commitment. Familiarity creates a sense of safety, routine, and shared history, but it does not automatically create allegiance. Time spent together builds recognition, not obligation. Knowing someone well does not mean they will stand by you when it matters. Familiar faces often benefit from assumptions. You assume they understand you, that shared memories equal shared values, that proximity equals reliability. But loyalty is not built through repetition. It is proven through choice. When circumstances change, when pressure appears, or when loyalty becomes inconvenient, familiarity alone offers no protection. This is why betrayal often comes from those closest to you, not because they intended harm, but because comfort can dull responsibility. They feel entitled to your presence without feeling accountable for your trust. History becomes a cushion that excuses absence, silence, or withdrawal. The emotional impact is sharp because expectation amplifies disappointment. You don't anticipate disloyalty from familiar faces, so when it happens, it cuts deeper. You realize that knowing someone's habits doesn't mean knowing their character. Understanding this truth shifts how you evaluate trust. It teaches you to look beyond shared pasts and focus on present behavior. Loyalty reveals itself in actions under pressure, not in years accumulated. And once you see that familiarity is not a guarantee, you become more careful about who you rely on, regardless of how long they've been around. People value outcomes, not effort. This truth is difficult because effort feels deeply personal. You know how much energy you invested, how many sacrifices you made, and how hard you tried, but most people never see that process. They only see results. What matters to them is whether something worked, not what it cost you to make it happen. Outcomes are easy to measure. They are visible, concrete, and comparable. Effort is invisible, internal, and subjective. Because of this, effort rarely earns lasting recognition unless it produces success. When results fall short, effort is often reinterpreted as inefficiency rather than dedication. This is why hard work can go unnoticed. You can give everything you have, and if the outcome doesn't meet expectations, appreciation fades quickly. People move on, adjust their standards, or look for someone else who can deliver. The intention behind your work becomes irrelevant once the result disappoints. This mindset shapes how people evaluate others. Praise is tied to achievement, not persistence. Failure overshadows commitment. Over time, this creates pressure to perform rather than to grow. Understanding this truth helps detach self-worth from external validation. It reminds you that effort still matters, even when it isn't acknowledged. It teaches you to choose where you invest your energy carefully. And once you recognize how outcome-driven most people are, you stop expecting them to see your struggle and start valuing your effort for yourself. Some people mistake loudness for strength. This truth exists because confidence is often confused with volume. Loudness is visible, immediate, and hard to ignore, while true strength is quiet, controlled, and consistent. In many environments, the person who speaks the most or dominates the room is assumed to be powerful, even when their behavior is driven by insecurity rather than capability. Raising one's voice, asserting opinions forcefully, or constantly demanding attention can create the illusion of authority. It fills space and silences others, but loudness often masks fragility. When someone is truly secure, they don't need to prove it. They allow actions, boundaries, and presence to speak for them. This is why calm people are sometimes underestimated. Restraint is misread as passivity, and composure is mistaken for weakness. Yet emotional regulation requires far more strength than emotional outbursts. The ability to remain steady under pressure is less visible, but far more powerful. Loudness seeks validation. Strength doesn't require it. One demands to be heard, the other is felt without announcement. Over time, loudness exhausts while strength endures. Understanding this truth sharpens your perception. It teaches you not to equate intensity with power or volume with confidence. It reminds you that the most influential people often move quietly, and that true strength rarely needs to announce itself to be real. People notice flaws faster than progress. This truth exists because the human mind is wired to detect problems before improvements. Flaws stand out. Progress unfolds quietly. A mistake disrupts expectation, while growth often happens gradually, without spectacle. Because of this, errors are remembered vividly while improvement is easily overlooked. People become accustomed to your effort. The work you put in, the changes you make, and the discipline you develop slowly become the new normal. Progress blends into expectation, but a single misstep shatters that image instantly. Attention snaps back, not to how far you've come, but to where you fell short. This imbalance can feel deeply discouraging. You may spend months evolving, only to be defined by one moment of failure. Feedback focuses on what went wrong, not on how much you corrected. Recognition arrives late, if at all. The emotional weight comes from feeling unseen in your effort but exposed in your imperfection. Over time, this can make growth feel pointless when it isn't acknowledged. It can create a fear of mistakes that stifles progress altogether. Understanding this truth helps recalibrate expectations. It teaches you not to rely on external validation to measure improvement. Progress is real even when unnoticed, and once you accept that flaws draw attention faster than growth, you stop letting temporary errors overshadow long-term change and begin valuing your evolution regardless of who sees it. People defend those who resemble them. This truth exists because people are instinctively loyal to reflections of themselves. When someone shares similar traits, beliefs, flaws, or behaviors, defending them feels like self-preservation. An attack on the other becomes an indirect attack on their own identity, so protection comes quickly and often without full information. Resemblance creates unconscious alliances. Shared habits, values, or even shared mistakes form a sense of kinship. When one person is criticized, the other feels exposed. Defending them is less about fairness and more about maintaining a narrative in which their shared behavior remains acceptable. This is why accountability is uneven. People are harsher toward those who differ and more forgiving toward those who feel familiar. They rationalize behavior in others that they would condemn in someone else. Similarity softens judgment, while difference sharpens it. This dynamic is especially visible in groups. Collective identity strengthens defense mechanisms. Criticism is reframed as misunderstanding, and patterns are dismissed as exceptions. Truth becomes secondary to loyalty. Understanding this truth sharpens discernment. It teaches you not to expect objectivity from those who see themselves in someone else. It reminds you that defense often signals identification, not truth. And once you recognize how resemblance shapes allegiance, you stop taking selective loyalty personally and start seeing it as a reflection of human nature, not your worth. Distance reveals who actually cares. This truth becomes clear when proximity is removed and effort is required. When people are no longer bound by routine, convenience, or constant access, their priorities surface. Distance strips relationships down to intention. Without shared space or habitual interaction, only those who truly value the connection make the effort to maintain it. Closeness can create the illusion of commitment. Regular contact may feel meaningful, but it doesn't always reflect depth. Distance introduces choice. Reaching out takes thought. Staying connected requires consistency. When that effort disappears, it reveals how much of the relationship depended on convenience rather than care. This can be painful because silence feels personal. But distance doesn't create indifference. It exposes it. People show what matters to them through what they maintain when it's no longer easy. Those who care adjust, adapt, and find ways to stay present, even if the form changes. Others fade without malice. They don't always leave intentionally. They simply follow the path of least resistance. The connection weakens not because of conflict, but because it was never anchored deeply enough to withstand separation. Understanding this truth helps you stop forcing closeness. It teaches you to observe who bridges the gap and who lets it widen. Distance becomes information, not rejection. And through that space, you learn which connections were rooted in habit and which were rooted in genuine care. People often love how you make them feel, not who you are. This truth is difficult because it exposes how easily affection can be conditional. When someone associates you with comfort, validation, excitement, or relief, those feelings become the foundation of their attachment. Your presence is valued for the emotional state it creates, not for your inner world, values, or complexities. This kind of love feels intense at first. You are appreciated, sought after, and praised. But the attachment is fragile. The moment you stop providing the same emotional experience, when you're tired, struggling, honest, or changed, the connection weakens. The affection was tied to a feeling, and feelings are temporary. The emotional cost appears when you express parts of yourself that don't fit the role. Your needs feel inconvenient. Your depth feels unexpected. You sense disappointment, not because you changed, but because the emotional return shifted. You were loved for what you evoked, not for who you are beneath it. This dynamic can make you shrink yourself to preserve connection. You learn which version of you is most accepted and unconsciously perform it. Over time, this creates exhaustion and disconnection from your authentic self. Understanding this truth creates clarity. It teaches you to notice whether someone is curious about your inner world or only about how you affect theirs. Real connection survives emotional shifts. And once you recognize the difference, you stop confusing emotional dependency with genuine love. Many people are uncomfortable with depth. This truth exists because depth demands presence, and presence demands vulnerability. Going beyond surface conversation means confronting emotions, uncertainty, and meaning, things many people have learned to avoid. Depth slows interactions down. It removes distractions and forces people to sit with themselves and others without escape. Surface-level connection feels safe. It allows humor without exposure, conversation without commitment, and closeness without risk. Depth, however, asks questions that don't have easy answers. It brings awareness to fears, desires, contradictions, and unresolved pain. For those who rely on distraction to cope, this can feel overwhelming. This discomfort often appears as avoidance. Conversations are redirected. Serious moments are softened with jokes. Emotional openness is met with silence or deflection. It's not that people don't care. It's that they don't have the capacity to stay present in emotional complexity. Depth also disrupts control. When things become real, scripts fail. You can't hide behind roles or rehearsed responses. Many people would rather keep interactions light than risk being seen clearly. Understanding this truth reframes rejection. It teaches you that withdrawal is often about capacity, not connection. It reminds you that depth is not for everyone, and that doesn't diminish its value. And once you accept that many people retreat from depth, you stop forcing it and start valuing those who can stay when conversations move beyond the surface. People expect understanding without giving it. This truth appears in the imbalance of many interactions. People want their actions contextualized, their flaws excused, and their intentions understood. They ask for patience, empathy, and grace, especially when they fall short. Yet when roles reverse, that same generosity often disappears. Understanding becomes a one-way expectation rather than a shared practice. Many people are deeply aware of their own internal struggles, but remain detached from the inner worlds of others. They know why they acted the way they did, but they judge others only by outcomes. Their behavior is humanized, yours is scrutinized. This double standard allows them to feel justified without being fair. Understanding requires effort. It asks someone to pause their own narrative and consider another perspective. That effort is often withheld when it threatens comfort or self-image. It's easier to ask for empathy than to practice it, easier to explain oneself than to truly listen. This imbalance creates quiet resentment. One person carries emotional labor, constantly making room for others, while receiving little in return. Over time, understanding turns into exhaustion rather than connection. Understanding this truth helps you recognize when empathy is being exploited. It reminds you that mutual understanding is built through reciprocity, not obligation. When someone consistently demands compassion but refuses to offer it, they are not asking for connection. They are asking for exemption. Some people keep you around out of habit. This truth is subtle because habit feels like loyalty on the surface. Routine creates comfort, and comfort is easily mistaken for care. When someone is used to your presence, your conversations, your availability, you become part of their rhythm. But familiarity does not always equal intention. Habit-based connection survives on inertia. The relationship continues not because of active choice, but because it has always been there. Calls are made out of routine, messages sent out of reflex, meetings happen because they always have. The relationship isn't nurtured, it's maintained on autopilot. The emotional cost appears when you look for depth and find repetition instead. There is no curiosity, no investment in who you're becoming, only an expectation that you remain the same. Growth feels inconvenient to habit. Change disrupts routine, so it's often ignored or subtly discouraged. Being kept out of habit can feel strangely empty. You are present, but not truly chosen. You are included, but not prioritized. The connection exists, yet it lacks intention. Understanding this truth sharpens emotional awareness. It teaches you to distinguish between being familiar and being valued. Real connection requires choice, not just continuity. And once you recognize when someone is staying out of habit rather than desire, you begin to seek relationships that are renewed by intention, not sustained by routine. People assume intentions based on their own nature. This truth exists because interpretation is filtered through character. When people try to understand why someone did something, they instinctively project their own motives onto the situation. A kind person looks for kindness. A manipulative person looks for manipulation. A dishonest person suspects dishonesty. What they assume about you often reveals more about them than about your actions. Human beings rely on internal reference points. They use their own values, habits, and instincts as templates for understanding others. This makes assumptions feel logical, even when they are inaccurate. Instead of asking, people conclude. Instead of clarifying, they interpret. This is why misunderstandings can persist even when intentions are clear. Your actions are viewed through someone else's emotional and moral framework. If their nature is guarded, they may see threat where none exists. If it is competitive, they may see strategy where there is sincerity. This projection becomes dangerous when it hardens into belief. Once someone assigns intention, they stop listening for correction. Your explanations are filtered, dismissed, or reinterpreted to fit their assumption. Understanding this truth reduces the need to over-explain. It teaches you that clarity does not guarantee accuracy when perception is biased. It reminds you that not everyone is capable of seeing you as you are. And once you recognize how strongly nature shapes interpretation, you stop chasing understanding from those who can only see the world through themselves. Being selfless can attract selfish people. This truth exists because selflessness creates opportunity, and selfish people are skilled at recognizing it. When you consistently put others first, prioritize harmony, and minimize your own needs, you become an easy source of comfort and benefit. Your giving nature signals availability, not to those who want to reciprocate, but to those who want to take. Selfish people are drawn to low resistance. They notice who overextends without complaint, who forgives quickly, and who adapts endlessly. Your selflessness reduces friction, making it easier for them to meet their needs without having to consider yours. Over time, imbalance becomes the norm. This dynamic rarely starts obviously. It often begins with appreciation, gratitude, and closeness. But as expectations grow, so does entitlement. What you once offered freely becomes expected. Your needs are postponed, dismissed, or labeled as inconvenient. Selflessness without boundaries teaches people how to treat you. It quietly communicates that your limits are flexible and your discomfort is negotiable. For those inclined toward selfishness, this is an invitation. Understanding this truth doesn't require abandoning kindness. It requires pairing generosity with self-respect. It teaches you that giving should not cost you your voice or your well-being. When selflessness is grounded in boundaries, it attracts balance. Without them, it attracts those who are most willing to take without giving back. People avoid hard conversations until it's too late. This truth exists because discomfort is easier to delay than to confront. Hard conversations threaten peace, challenge self-image, and risk conflict. So many people choose silence instead. They convince themselves that the issue will resolve on its own, that timing will improve, or that speaking up would only make things worse. Avoidance feels harmless in the moment. Nothing explodes, nothing changes, and life continues. But unresolved tension doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Small issues turn into resentment. Misunderstandings deepen. Emotional distance grows quietly without announcement. By the time the conversation finally happens, the damage has already taken root. This is why so many endings feel sudden, but were actually long in the making. The truth was withheld too long. What could have been repaired early becomes too heavy to untangle later. When words finally surface, they arrive with frustration instead of clarity. The emotional weight of this truth lies in realizing how much could have been saved through honesty. Silence preserves comfort temporarily, but costs connection over time. Understanding this truth reframes courage. It teaches that discomfort faced early prevents greater pain later. Hard conversations are not destructive by nature, avoidance is. And once you recognize how delay compounds damage, you become more willing to speak while there is still time to be heard. Not everyone deserves access to you. This truth feels uncomfortable because access is often confused with kindness. Many people are taught that openness equals goodness and that distance signals coldness. But access is not a moral obligation, it is a privilege. Allowing someone into your thoughts, time, energy, and inner world should be intentional, not automatic. Access exposes you. It gives people the ability to influence your emotions, drain your energy, or shape your self-perception. When given without discernment, it invites misunderstanding, entitlement, and harm. Not everyone who wants closeness has the capacity to handle it responsibly. Some people misuse access. They overstep boundaries, demand availability, or take familiarity for granted. Others lack the emotional maturity to engage with your vulnerability without judgment or control. Their presence doesn't feel supportive. It feels invasive. This is why boundaries are essential. They are not walls meant to isolate, but filters that protect. Limiting access is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. It ensures that the people who are close to you have earned that position through consistency, care, and respect. Understanding this truth reshapes relationships. It teaches you that you don't owe everyone openness. That distance can be healthy. And once you accept that access must be earned, you stop overextending yourself and start preserving your energy for those who treat it with care. People rarely change without loss. This truth exists because comfort resists transformation. As long as life remains manageable, there is little incentive to reflect deeply or alter behavior. Change threatens identity, habits, and familiarity. Loss, however, breaks that stability. It removes what once made avoidance possible and forces confrontation with reality. Loss can take many forms: relationships, opportunities, respect, health, or self-image. When something meaningful is taken away, denial becomes harder to maintain. The absence creates space where reflection enters. Pain interrupts routine and demands attention. What was once ignored becomes impossible to avoid. Many people promise change when faced with discomfort, but intention alone rarely reshapes behavior. Without consequence, old patterns return. Loss creates consequence. It attaches emotional weight to behavior, turning abstract lessons into lived experience. Only then does change begin to feel necessary rather than optional. This is why advice often fails where experience succeeds. Hearing the truth is different from feeling it. Loss makes the cost real. It teaches in a way words cannot. Understanding this truth helps you release frustration with those who don't change despite awareness. It also reframes your own losses. While painful, they often serve as catalysts rather than punishments. Change that comes without loss is rare because nothing forces it. Loss does. People confuse attachment with connection. This truth exists because attachment feels intense, and intensity is often mistaken for depth. Attachment is driven by need, fear, and dependency. Connection is built on understanding, choice, and mutual presence. But because attachment creates strong emotional reactions, many people assume it means something profound. Attachment forms quickly. It clings to familiarity, validation, and consistency. Someone becomes important not because they are deeply known, but because they soothe loneliness, fill emotional gaps, or provide stability. The bond feels urgent, but it is fragile. When the source of comfort is threatened, attachment reacts with anxiety, control, or fear of loss. Connection behaves differently. It allows space without panic. It survives change and disagreement. It doesn't rely on constant reassurance to exist, but connection develops slowly, requiring effort, honesty, and emotional safety, which many people avoid. The emotional confusion comes when attachment is mislabeled as love or intimacy. The relationship feels intense but shallow. You may feel needed but not understood, close but unseen. When circumstances change, the bond collapses because it was never rooted in true connection. Understanding this truth clarifies emotional dynamics. It teaches you to look beyond intensity and examine stability, curiosity, and respect. And once you recognize the difference, you stop mistaking emotional dependence for genuine connection. Many people fear honesty more than betrayal. This truth is disturbing because it reveals how deeply comfort governs behavior. Betrayal, while painful, can be externalized. It can be blamed, condemned, and emotionally compartmentalized. Honesty, however, forces internal confrontation. It challenges self-image, exposes flaws, and removes the safety of denial. Honesty brings clarity, and clarity demands change. When someone is honest with you, or when you are honest with them, it disrupts narratives that people rely on to feel secure. It threatens relationships built on assumption, silence, or unspoken agreements. Betrayal hurts, but honesty destabilizes. This is why people often punish truth-tellers more harshly than liars. A lie preserves comfort in the moment. Honesty creates tension that must be addressed. Rather than facing that discomfort, many people choose to reject the message by rejecting the messenger. Betrayal can be mourned without self-reflection. Honesty cannot. It requires listening, accountability, and emotional labor. For those unwilling to do that work, silence feels safer than truth. Understanding this truth reframes reactions. It teaches you not to measure your honesty by how well it's received. It reminds you that resistance often signals avoidance, not wrongdoing. And once you see how strongly people protect comfort, you stop mistaking rejection of truth as proof that you were wrong. People see generosity as unlimited. This truth emerges when giving is met with expectation instead of appreciation. Generosity, when consistent, is often misinterpreted as capacity rather than choice. People stop seeing the effort behind it and begin to assume it has no end. What was once a gift becomes a resource they feel entitled to use. The more freely you give, the less visible the cost becomes. Your time, energy, and emotional labor are taken as available by default. People rarely ask how much it costs you. They only notice when it's no longer there. Generosity creates comfort, and comfort breeds assumption. This is why limits on generosity often surprise people. When you pull back, confusion or disappointment follows, not because you were wrong to give less, but because others believed there was no limit to what you would offer. Your generosity was mistaken for obligation. This dynamic can quietly drain you. When generosity is treated as endless, it erases reciprocity. You become a source rather than a person. Over time, the imbalance grows, and resentment replaces warmth. Understanding this truth teaches you to give with intention rather than reflex. It reminds you that generosity is most meaningful when it is chosen, not assumed. When you place boundaries around your giving, you preserve its value and protect yourself from being reduced to what you provide. Some people compete silently with friends. This truth is difficult to notice because the competition is never declared. On the surface, there is support, laughter, and shared experiences. Beneath it, comparison quietly shapes perception. Achievements are measured, progress is tracked, and successes are weighed against personal standing, all without a word being spoken. Silent competition often comes from insecurity, not hostility. A friend's growth can unintentionally trigger self-doubt. Instead of celebrating freely, some people internalize comparison and turn the relationship into a benchmark. They may congratulate you, but the praise feels restrained. Your wins are acknowledged, then quickly minimized or redirected. The emotional tension appears in subtle behaviors. Enthusiasm fades when you succeed. Advice becomes caution. Support feels conditional. You sense a shift but can't point to a clear offense. The competition lives in tone, timing, and energy rather than words. This dynamic is draining because friendship is expected to be safe. You lower your guard only to feel quietly measured. Over time, you may downplay your progress to keep the peace or avoid triggering discomfort. Understanding this truth sharpens emotional awareness. It teaches you to notice who celebrates without comparison and who grows distant when you thrive. Real friends don't feel threatened by your progress. And once you recognize silent competition, you stop shrinking yourself for comfort and start valuing relationships where growth is shared, not scored. People rationalize mistreatment when it benefits them. This truth exists because self-interest is a powerful motivator. When someone gains comfort, control, or advantage from mistreating another person, the mind quickly searches for ways to make that behavior feel acceptable. Instead of questioning the harm, people adjust the story around it until it no longer feels wrong. Rationalization protects the ego. It reframes mistreatment as necessity, misunderstanding, or deserved consequence. I had no choice. They're too sensitive. Or, this is just how things are, become tools to quiet guilt. The focus shifts away from impact and toward justification. This pattern thrives when power or convenience is involved. If someone benefits emotionally, socially, or materially, acknowledging harm would require sacrifice. Rather than give up that benefit, they distort reality. Over time, repeated rationalization numbs empathy and normalizes behavior that would otherwise feel unacceptable. This is why mistreatment can persist without apology or change. As long as it serves a purpose, it is defended. The person being harmed is subtly blamed for the situation, making resistance seem unreasonable. Understanding this truth sharpens boundaries. It teaches you not to wait for validation from those who profit from your discomfort. It reminds you that explanations do not equal accountability. And once you recognize how easily benefit overrides conscience, you stop trying to reason with rationalization and start protecting yourself instead. Respect is tested when you disagree. This truth surfaces the moment alignment breaks. Agreement is easy. It requires no restraint, no empathy, no maturity. Disagreement, however, creates tension, and tension reveals how much respect truly exists. When opinions differ, people are forced to choose between honoring the relationship or defending their ego. Many people confuse respect with compliance. As long as you agree, you are valued. The moment you challenge a belief, set a different boundary, or hold an opposing view, the tone shifts. Dismissiveness, sarcasm, or withdrawal replaces dialogue. What they call disrespect is often just your refusal to conform. True respect allows for difference without devaluation. It doesn't require agreement to maintain dignity. It listens without trying to dominate. When respect is conditional, it collapses under disagreement because it was never rooted in regard, it was rooted in control. This is why conflict is revealing. It shows whether someone values you as an equal or merely as an extension of their own perspective. Disagreement doesn't damage respectful relationships. It exposes fragile ones. Understanding this truth changes how you interpret reactions. It teaches you not to measure respect by how well things go when everyone agrees, but by how you're treated when you don't. Because respect that disappears in disagreement was never respect to begin with. People don't notice peace until it's gone. This truth exists because peace is quiet. It doesn't demand attention, create drama, or announce itself loudly. When life feels stable and calm, it fades into the background of daily experience. People adapt to it quickly, assuming it is permanent, something that will always be there without effort. Chaos, on the other hand, is impossible to ignore. When peace disappears, its absence becomes overwhelming. The calm that once softened days is replaced by tension, noise, and emotional strain. Only then do people recognize what peace was providing: clarity, rest, and emotional safety. This is why peace is often undervalued. It doesn't stimulate, impress, or excite. It simply allows life to flow smoothly. Many people chase intensity, mistaking it for meaning, until exhaustion forces awareness. By then, peace feels distant and difficult to reclaim. The emotional weight of this truth lies in regret. You realize that what you overlooked was what held everything together. The quiet stability you ignored was the foundation beneath your well-being. Understanding this truth changes perception. It teaches you to recognize peace while it exists, not after it's disrupted. And once you understand how easily peace is taken for granted, you become more protective of it, even when others don't notice its value until it's already gone. Many people are loyal to comfort, not people. This truth becomes clear when circumstances change. As long as a relationship feels easy, familiar, and emotionally rewarding, loyalty appears strong. But when discomfort enters, conflict, inconvenience, growth, or sacrifice, many people quietly shift their allegiance. What they were loyal to was never the person, but the comfort the relationship provided. Comfort asks for very little. It doesn't demand courage, accountability, or effort. It allows people to stay without being tested. Loyalty to a person, however, requires choosing them even when it costs something. That kind of loyalty is rare because it challenges self-interest. This is why support often fades when things become difficult. People don't always betray you. They simply retreat toward what feels easier. They justify distance as self-care, neutrality, or practicality, avoiding the discomfort of involvement. Comfort-based loyalty is fragile. It disappears when the relationship stops serving its original function. Shared history, promises, and words mean little once ease is disrupted. What remains is absence, not conflict. Understanding this truth recalibrates expectations. It teaches you to recognize who stays when comfort leaves. It reminds you that true loyalty shows itself under strain, not ease. And once you see how many people choose comfort over commitment, you begin to value the rare ones who remain present when it's no longer convenient. People remember your mistakes longer than your growth. This truth exists because change challenges perception. When someone forms an image of you during a mistake, that version becomes familiar and easy to recall. Growth requires updating that image, and many people resist doing that work. It's simpler to hold on to who you were than to acknowledge who you've become. Mistakes create strong impressions. They come with emotion, judgment, and often disappointment. Those moments stick. Growth, on the other hand, is gradual and quiet. It doesn't demand attention. It unfolds over time, without spectacle. As a result, it's often overlooked or minimized. This is why people may continue to treat you according to an outdated version of yourself. They reference past behavior while ignoring present effort, not always out of malice, but out of cognitive ease. Letting go of old narratives requires humility and openness. This can feel discouraging, especially when you've done the work to change. But growth isn't invalidated by others' memory. It exists regardless of recognition. People may lag behind your evolution, seeing echoes instead of reality. Understanding this truth helps you detach from external validation. It teaches you that growth is not about convincing others, but about alignment with yourself. Those who are willing to see you clearly will catch up. Those who aren't were never meant to define who you are becoming. Some people need chaos to feel alive. This truth exists because stillness can feel unbearable to those who haven't learned how to sit with themselves. Chaos creates stimulation, distraction, and intensity. It drowns out internal discomfort. For some people, calm feels empty, unfamiliar, or even threatening, so they unconsciously seek disorder to feel something. Chaos provides identity. Conflict, drama, and instability become normal, even comforting. When life begins to settle, restlessness appears. They provoke arguments, create problems, or gravitate toward unstable situations, not out of malice, but because unpredictability feels like movement. Peace feels like stagnation to them. The emotional damage comes from proximity. When you bring stability into their lives, it disrupts their rhythm. Instead of appreciating the calm, they resist it. Your peace highlights their inner unrest. Over time, they may pull you into cycles of tension, leaving you drained and confused. This is why relationships with chaos-driven people feel exhausting. Progress is undone, harmony is short-lived, and calm never lasts. Just when things feel steady, something is stirred. Understanding this truth teaches discernment. It helps you recognize when conflict is intentional rather than circumstantial. And once you see that some people are energized by disorder, you stop trying to fix it. You protect your peace, knowing that calm is not boring, it's healthy, and not everyone knows how to live in it. People often expect forgiveness, not consequences. This truth exists because forgiveness feels emotionally relieving, while consequences feel threatening. Many people apologize or acknowledge harm with the quiet expectation that things will return to normal. They want emotional release, not accountability. Forgiveness becomes a reset button rather than a doorway to change. Consequences force reflection. They interrupt comfort and require responsibility. Forgiveness, when given too quickly or without boundaries, allows people to avoid examining their behavior. This is why some apologies feel urgent, not because of remorse, but because of fear of loss or discomfort. People are often taught that forgiveness is a virtue, while consequences are framed as harsh or unforgiving. This creates an imbalance where the injured party feels pressured to move on, while the person who caused harm feels entitled to closure. The emotional labor shifts unfairly to the one who was hurt. This expectation becomes most visible when boundaries are enforced. Distance, limits, or changed behavior are met with surprise or offense. Forgiveness was assumed to mean access restored, trust renewed, and accountability dissolved. Understanding this truth restores agency. It teaches you that forgiveness and consequences are not opposites, that healing does not require erasing impact. And once you accept that some people seek forgiveness to avoid responsibility, you stop feeling guilty for choosing protection over premature peace. People take consistency for granted. This truth emerges when reliability becomes expected rather than valued. Consistency feels quiet and unremarkable because it lacks drama. Showing up regularly, keeping promises, and being emotionally steady slowly fade into the background. What once felt reassuring becomes invisible. The human mind adapts quickly. When something is dependable, it stops registering as effort. People assume it will continue without considering the discipline or intention behind it. Consistency becomes part of the environment, not something to acknowledge. It is noticed only when it disappears. This is why dependable people are often undervalued. Their absence is more disruptive than their presence is appreciated. They are relied on without recognition and missed only after withdrawal. Over time, this dynamic can create exhaustion and quiet resentment. In contrast, inconsistency often attracts more attention. Unpredictability creates tension, and tension creates focus. Steady effort doesn't trigger urgency, so it is overlooked, even though it is what holds things together. Understanding this truth changes how you give. It teaches you that consistency should be intentional, not unconditional, that your reliability is a strength, but it deserves boundaries. When consistency is paired with self-respect, it remains sustainable. Without it, you risk becoming invisible while carrying the weight of everything that depends on you. Not everyone claps when you succeed. This truth becomes clear the moment your progress outpaces expectation. Success changes dynamics. It alters comparison, challenges self-perception, and shifts unspoken hierarchies. While some people celebrate openly, others grow quiet. Their silence isn't always hostility, but it often carries discomfort. Support is easy when you're struggling or equal. When you succeed, your growth becomes a mirror. It reflects what others hoped for, postponed, or abandoned. Instead of feeling inspired, some feel exposed. Applause becomes difficult when success highlights personal insecurity. This is why congratulations can feel restrained or absent. Your achievements may be acknowledged briefly, then ignored. Conversations move on quickly. Enthusiasm fades. The lack of response feels confusing because you expected shared joy, not distance. The emotional weight lies in realizing that success can isolate you. You didn't change, but the way you are perceived did. Your growth disrupted comfort, and not everyone is equipped to handle that shift. Understanding this truth reframes celebration. It teaches you not to measure your achievements by external applause. Genuine support reveals itself in consistent encouragement, not public praise. And once you accept that not everyone will clap, you stop shrinking your success to preserve comfort and continue moving forward without apology. People listen more to tone than truth. This truth exists because emotion is processed faster than meaning. Before people fully register what is being said, they react to how it is said. Tone signals threat, safety, confidence, or vulnerability, and the brain prioritizes those cues over the actual message. As a result, truth can be ignored if the delivery feels uncomfortable. This is why calm falsehoods are often accepted while emotional honesty is dismissed. If your tone triggers defensiveness, your words lose power regardless of their accuracy. People stop listening to understand and start listening to protect themselves. Tone also provides an easy way to avoid accountability. Focusing on delivery allows people to sidestep the content. The message is reframed as aggressive, rude, or inappropriate, shifting attention away from what was actually said. Truth becomes secondary to emotional reaction. This dynamic places an unfair burden on honesty. You are expected to package truth in a way that feels safe, non-threatening, and palatable, even when the truth itself is disruptive. If you fail to do so, your message is dismissed. Understanding this truth changes how you communicate and how you interpret responses. It teaches you that being unheard does not mean being wrong. It reminds you that discomfort often signals proximity to truth. And once you recognize how tone filters meaning, you stop measuring truth by how gently it is received. Many people fear being seen too clearly. This truth exists because being truly seen removes the ability to hide behind curated versions of the self. When someone sees you clearly, they see contradictions, insecurities, motives, and patterns, not just the polished exterior. For many people, that level of visibility feels threatening. It exposes parts they've spent years avoiding or protecting. Being seen clearly means being known without illusion. It means someone can recognize your defenses, your emotional habits, and the stories you tell yourself. That kind of awareness dissolves control. You can no longer manage perception or rely on surface charm. For those who depend on masks to feel safe, this feels deeply uncomfortable. This fear often shows up as distance. People deflect with humor, change the subject, or keep interactions shallow. They may label depth as too much or vulnerability as unnecessary. It's not because they don't value connection, but because true intimacy requires honesty they're not ready to face. Some people are afraid that if they're seen clearly, they'll be rejected. Others fear being held accountable to who they claim to be. Being seen means being known, and being known removes plausible deniability. Understanding this truth helps you stop personalizing withdrawal. It teaches you that someone pulling away from depth is often protecting themselves, not rejecting you, and it reminds you that clarity is powerful, because only those who are willing to face themselves can tolerate being seen without armor. People avoid self-reflection whenever possible. This truth exists because self-reflection is uncomfortable. It requires confronting contradictions, mistakes, and unresolved emotions. Looking inward threatens the narratives people build to feel competent, justified, and good. Avoidance becomes a form of self-protection, even when it stalls growth. Instead of examining themselves, Many people externalize blame. Problems are attributed to circumstances, other people, or bad luck. Reflection is replaced with distraction, defensiveness, or repetition. It feels safer to repeat patterns than to question them. Self-reflection also demands responsibility. Once you see your role clearly, you can't unsee it. Change becomes necessary, and change requires effort. For many, maintaining familiar dysfunction feels easier than facing the work of improvement. The emotional toll appears in stagnation. Relationships cycle through the same conflicts. Mistakes repeat under different names. Growth is delayed not by lack of opportunity, but by refusal to look inward. Understanding this truth creates clarity. It teaches you not to expect awareness from those unwilling to reflect. You stop over-explaining. Stop waiting for insight that never comes. And once you recognize how rare genuine self-examination is, you begin valuing it in yourself and others, knowing that reflection is not weakness, but the beginning of real change. People avoid self-reflection whenever possible. This truth exists because self-reflection is deeply uncomfortable. It forces people to confront contradictions, mistakes, and unresolved emotions they would rather ignore. Looking inward threatens the identity they've built to feel justified, capable, and in control. Avoidance becomes a form of self-preservation, even when it silently limits growth. Instead of examining themselves, many people redirect attention outward. Blame is placed on circumstances, other people, timing, or fate. Reflection is replaced with defensiveness, distraction, or repetition of the same patterns under new excuses. It feels safer to repeat familiar behaviors than to question them. Self-reflection also carries a heavy cost, responsibility. Once someone clearly sees their role in a situation, denial is no longer possible. Change becomes necessary, and change requires effort, humility, and discomfort. For many, maintaining a familiar dysfunction feels easier than facing the work of personal accountability. The emotional impact of this avoidance shows up as stagnation. The same conflicts resurface. The same mistakes repeat. Growth feels blocked, not because insight is unavailable, but because it is actively resisted. Understanding this truth shifts expectations. It teaches you not to wait for awareness from those unwilling to look inward. You stop explaining, stop hoping your clarity will become theirs. And once you recognize how rare genuine self-examination is, you begin to value it deeply, knowing that reflection is not weakness, but the foundation of real change. Some people only show up when it's easy. This truth becomes clear in moments of difficulty. When life is light, celebratory, or convenient, certain people are present, responsive, and engaged. Their support feels consistent until effort is required. As soon as discomfort, complexity, or emotional weight appears, their presence fades. Easy moments demand little. They require no sacrifice, no emotional labor, and no resilience. Showing up during those times feels good and reinforces a positive self-image. Hard moments, however, expose limits. They require patience, courage, and the willingness to sit with discomfort. Many people quietly opt out when that cost appears. This absence is rarely explained. It shows up as delayed replies, vague excuses, or sudden busyness. The withdrawal feels personal, but it often reflects capacity rather than intent. Still, the impact remains the same. You are left alone when support matters most. This pattern teaches a hard lesson about consistency. Being present only when it's easy is not reliability, it's convenience. Real presence is proven in strain, not comfort. Understanding this truth reshapes how you define support. It teaches you to notice who remains when situations are messy and unresolved. It reminds you that availability during ease does not equal commitment. And once you see who disappears when things get hard, you stop overvaluing presence that only exists under perfect conditions. People protect their ego at all costs. This truth exists because the ego is tied to identity, and threats to identity feel like threats to survival. When someone's self-image is challenged, the mind reacts defensively. Rational thought often gives way to justification, denial, or blame. Preserving how they see themselves becomes more important than truth, growth, or connection. People will rewrite events to maintain innocence. They will minimize harm, shift responsibility, or question others' intentions rather than confront their own flaws. This protection isn't always conscious. The ego's primary function is self-preservation, and it operates quickly when exposed. This is why honest feedback is often met with resistance. Even when delivered with care, it can feel like an attack. Admitting fault requires humility, and humility threatens the ego's narrative of competence or goodness, so defenses rise, conversations derail, and accountability is avoided. Ego protection also explains why apologies feel incomplete and conflicts remain unresolved. Repair requires vulnerability, and vulnerability weakens the ego's control. Many people choose distance or denial over the discomfort of self-examination. Understanding this truth helps you navigate conflict with clarity. It reminds you that resistance is often about self-protection, not malice. It also teaches you not to exhaust yourself trying to break through defenses that others are committed to maintaining. Growth only happens when someone is willing to let their ego take a back seat, and many never do. Being understanding can make you overlooked. This truth exists because understanding absorbs conflict instead of exposing it. When you empathize, forgive easily, and give others the benefit of the doubt, you reduce friction, you smooth over tension that would otherwise force awareness. While this makes you easy to be around, it also makes your needs easy to ignore. People adjust to the absence of resistance. Your patience becomes the default. Your flexibility is assumed. Over time, your understanding is no longer appreciated as a choice, but expected as a trait. When you don't react, others assume you're unaffected. When you don't complain, they assume you're fine. The emotional cost appears quietly. You are present, reliable, and emotionally available, yet rarely prioritized. Your depth is overlooked because you don't demand attention. Your sacrifices go unnoticed because you don't make them visible. You become the emotional buffer everyone leans on without recognizing the weight you carry. This dynamic is rarely intentional. Most people aren't trying to dismiss you. They simply respond to what's loud. Needs that are expressed forcefully are addressed. Needs that are handled gracefully are forgotten. Understanding this truth teaches balance. It shows that empathy without self-advocacy invites invisibility. Being understanding is powerful, but it must be paired with boundaries. And once you realize how easily quiet strength is overlooked, you begin to speak up, not to be dramatic, but to be seen. People often leave without explanation. This truth is painful because the absence of explanation creates a void the mind desperately tries to fill. When someone disappears without clarity, it leaves behind unanswered questions, self-doubt, and unfinished emotional loops. The silence feels heavier than rejection because it offers no direction, no closure, no understanding. People leave quietly because explaining requires courage. It demands honesty, emotional responsibility, and the willingness to witness someone else's reaction. Many choose disappearance instead, believing distance is easier than discomfort. Silence becomes a way to avoid accountability. This behavior is often justified internally. People tell themselves that explanations would only make things worse, that distance is kinder, or that they don't owe anyone clarity. These narratives protect them from guilt, while transferring confusion to the person left behind. The hardest part is that the absence of explanation often has nothing to do with your worth. It reflects someone's inability to communicate or confront conflict, but without context, the mind turns inward, searching for flaws that may not exist. Understanding this truth reframes silence. It teaches you that closure doesn't always come from answers. It reminds you that someone's inability to explain is not proof of your inadequacy. And once you accept that people leave without clarity, you stop chasing explanations from those who chose absence over honesty. Not everyone who stays is loyal. This truth challenges the assumption that presence equals commitment. Staying can look like loyalty on the surface, but proximity alone doesn't guarantee alignment, honesty, or care. Some people remain close for reasons that have nothing to do with devotion. Habit, convenience, access, or benefit can all keep someone in place. Loyalty involves intention. It requires choosing someone even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. Staying without integrity is simply occupying space. A person can be present physically while emotionally detached, quietly critical, or self-serving. Their absence would be obvious, but their disloyalty is subtle. This is why betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It often comes from those who never left. They gather information, observe vulnerabilities, and remain silent while trust erodes. Staying gives them proximity, and proximity gives influence. Some people stay because leaving would cost them more than staying. Familiarity feels safer than honesty. Remaining requires less courage than addressing conflict or walking away truthfully. Understanding this truth sharpens your awareness. It teaches you to evaluate loyalty by behavior, not duration. Consistency, protection, and integrity reveal loyalty far more accurately than mere presence. Because someone can stay for years and still never truly be on your side. Some people only respect strength after you withdraw. This truth exists because presence can be mistaken for permission. When you are consistently available, patient, and understanding, some people interpret that as tolerance rather than strength. Your boundaries feel flexible, your absence unimaginable. Strength in their eyes is invisible as long as you remain accessible. Withdrawal disrupts that illusion. When you step back, reduce access, or remove your energy, the dynamic shifts. What was once taken for granted becomes noticeable. Your absence creates contrast, and only then does your value register. Respect appears not because you changed, but because the cost of losing access became real. This response is rooted in consequence. Some people don't recognize boundaries until they are enforced. They respond not to communication, but to loss. Words were optional. Distance is undeniable. This realization can be painful. It reveals that respect was conditional on scarcity, not appreciation. You were valued most when you were no longer available to be taken for granted. Understanding this truth teaches restraint. It reminds you that strength does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it is expressed through distance, not confrontation. And once you see how withdrawal clarifies dynamics, you stop over-explaining your boundaries and let absence do the work that words could not. People remember boundaries as rejection. This truth exists because boundaries disrupt access. When someone is used to emotional closeness, availability, or influence, a boundary can feel like a personal dismissal rather than an act of self-respect. Even when boundaries are communicated calmly and fairly, they are often filtered through emotion instead of understanding. People tend to interpret boundaries based on how they feel, not what was said. If a boundary creates discomfort, it's remembered as distance. If it removes privilege, it's remembered as abandonment. The intention behind the boundary is lost, replaced by the emotional response it triggered. This is why boundaries are often reframed as coldness or hostility. Accepting a boundary would require someone to examine their expectations or entitlement. It's easier to view the boundary setter as rejecting than to acknowledge that access was never guaranteed. Over time, this misinterpretation solidifies. People don't remember the clarity or fairness of the boundary. They remember how it made them feel. The narrative becomes emotional rather than factual. Understanding this truth helps you stop over-explaining yourself. It reminds you that boundaries will be remembered through subjective experience, not objective logic. Setting them is not about being understood by everyone. It's about protecting yourself. Those who respect you will adapt. Those who feel rejected by your boundaries were often benefiting from your lack of them. People confuse attention with importance. This truth exists because attention is visible, immediate, and emotionally stimulating. Being noticed, messaged, praised, or acknowledged creates a rush that feels like validation. Over time, that feeling is mistaken for significance. People begin to believe that attention reflects value, even when it's shallow, inconsistent, or self-serving. Attention is easy to give and easy to take away. Importance is not. Importance shows up in consistency, care, and sacrifice, not in moments of focus. But the brain craves stimulation, and attention satisfies that craving quickly. It feels like proof of relevance, even when it carries no substance. This is why people chase attention that costs nothing to the giver. Likes, compliments, and fleeting interest create the illusion of being valued without requiring commitment. When attention fades, insecurity follows, not because importance was lost, but because it was never there to begin with. Confusing the two leads to fragile self-worth. People measure their value by how often they are noticed rather than how deeply they are respected. They tolerate neglect as long as attention appears occasionally, mistaking inconsistency for desirability. Understanding this truth changes what you respond to. It teaches you to distinguish between those who look at you and those who invest in you. Attention flatters the ego. Importance protects your well-being. Once you learn the difference, you stop chasing what feels good briefly and start valuing what lasts quietly. Many people don't know how to love healthily. This truth exists because love is often learned through observation, not intention. People absorb patterns from their environment, conflict, neglect, control, inconsistency, and internalize them as normal. When they later try to love, they repeat what feels familiar even when it's harmful. Unhealthy love can look intense, loyal, or passionate on the surface. It may involve sacrifice, attachment, or emotional closeness. But without boundaries, communication, and respect, it becomes unstable. Many people confuse love with endurance, believing that pain is proof of depth and chaos is proof of connection. Healthy love requires emotional regulation, self-awareness, and mutual responsibility. It asks people to manage their fears without projecting them, to communicate instead of withdraw, and to give without controlling. These skills are rarely taught. As a result, many people love the best they can with the tools they have, even if those tools are broken. This is why love alone doesn't sustain relationships. Intention cannot replace skill. Two people can care deeply and still hurt each other repeatedly because they lack the ability to love in a way that is safe and balanced. Understanding this truth helps you stop romanticizing dysfunction. It reminds you that love is not measured by intensity, but by stability. Knowing how to love healthily is not instinctive. It's learned. And without learning it, affection alone is never enough. People value you more when you're scarce. This truth exists because availability shapes perception. When you are always present, responsive, and accessible, your presence blends into the background. Familiarity dulls urgency. Scarcity, however, sharpens attention. What is limited feels more valuable because it requires intention to obtain. Scarcity introduces contrast. When you are no longer constantly available, people are forced to notice what they lost access to. Your time, energy, and presence gain weight once they are no longer guaranteed. This isn't always about appreciation. It's about awareness. Human beings often realize value in absence rather than presence. What is consistently available feels replaceable. What requires effort feels significant. This is why people sometimes only recognize your importance after you pull back, slow down, or stop overgiving. This dynamic can feel unfair, especially if you are offering yourself genuinely. But it reveals how perception works. Value is not only about what you offer, but how easily it can be accessed. Understanding this truth changes behavior. It teaches you that constant availability is not the same as importance. It reminds you that preserving your energy is not manipulation, but self-respect. And once you accept that scarcity clarifies value, you stop overextending and start letting your presence be something that must be chosen. Most people don't change, they just reveal themselves. This truth becomes clear with time, pressure, and consistency. What appears as change is often just exposure. As situations shift and masks wear thin, people don't become different. They become more visible. Their values, limits, and patterns surface when convenience disappears and expectations rise. Early impressions are often filtered through effort. People present their best selves when something is new, when approval matters, or when they need to secure connection. Over time, maintaining that version requires energy. When the effort fades, what remains is not a transformation, but a revelation. This is why people often say someone changed after conflict, success, or hardship. In reality, circumstances removed the incentive to hide. Stress exposes priorities. Power reveals character. Comfort uncovers habits. The core was always there. True change is rare because it requires sustained self-awareness and accountability. Most people don't engage in that work. Instead, they adapt their presentation to the moment. When the moment shifts, so does the performance. Understanding this truth changes how you interpret behavior. It teaches you to trust patterns over promises and consistency over explanation. When someone shows you who they are, especially repeatedly, that is not evolution, it is disclosure. And once revealed, it is information meant to be accepted, not negotiated.